in the presentations we would like to revisit later, you can do that as well. The main objectives for today, at least from our point of view, is for you all to learn something, to network, discuss and disagree, especially disagree if there's something, but not like in an awful way. It could be over a coffee or a beer later. To, of course, meet us in person. We love to meet people belly to belly and have fun. The fun part is, of course, in the breaks and at the happy hour later. If you had never heard about Whitson, we're a software and consulting company. We have 3 software products that we are working on. One of them is Whitson Plus. That's our well performance software. If you're curious about that, go and meet Hamid and Graham in the breaks, and he'll tell you all about that. But if you want a simple way of thinking about it, we like to think about it as this bridge between reservoir and production engineering. If you have a company and you have PVT reports all over the company, you have some in a SharePoint, some in a physical print, some in Excel, some in PDF, different laboratory formats, etc., and you want to systemize that, make sure you go and contact my friend Chris Deuce on the first row here, and he and his team are building out a product that helps with both databasing PVT data and associated models across your company. Last but not least, we'll hear about these two are both Canadian, by the way. This would get some bonus points in the audience, right, if they're Canadian. Even though, Braden, you live in Texas, so you don't count. So Whitson X is our development optimization engine. I'm not going to say too much about this, but it's something we've put a lot of effort into since the summer, and we're working with more than 20 operators on making that a very, very good product now. Braden is going to demo it later, and Ryan is also going to talk about some associated benefits a little bit later today. So we started on this Whitson journey around 5-6 years ago, starting to develop software products. And since then, we've tried to just make it simple for you guys to work with us. And what does simple mean? Well, simple mean that you can access everything that we have in each of the products for one price and unlimited number of users. So there's no seat squatting, and you can do concurrency. You can have multiple browsers up and do different things simultaneously in the product. The things that we think make sense to keep in one interface, we loop that into one product such that you can do the whole workflow from A to C inside of that tool. And you can access the product from what we call single sign-on. So you just go to your company domain.whitson.com and you're off to the races. Very, very important for us. We have software training also now on Wednesday. They're 100% complimentary. We're adding more and more courses every year. I think there's 15 of them this year. They're 100% complimentary, and they're also recorded after the fact if you'd like to revisit them at your own pace. Most importantly for us is to make sure that we have a very, very good support. What does that mean in practice? Well, if you send a support ticket or use our ticketing system, you'll get a response on average in less than 2 minutes from a lot of the individuals here on this particular screen. Going forward, our promise to you is very simple. We will continue to double down on support and training. What that means is that we'll not get an AI chatbot that you can talk to, but real people. I went to UFC, I went to Texas A&M, went to OU, etc., and hire them, and you talk to professionals and domain experts when you use the product. We'll also continue to broaden the audience, so we've doubled down a lot on items related to production engineering, declines. Whitson X is kind of a new frontier for us as well, and we'll continue to do that as we grow as a company. Very, very important for us. If you haven't integrated your data automatically into the software, we have an own data integration team that gets your Databricks, Snowflake, internal SQL tables, access tables, whatever system you have connected to any of our software products. So if you're not working with them, I encourage you to reach out. And lastly, most important for us is that we deliver these things with a sense of urgency. We know you guys have very important deliverables at work. So when you submit a support ticket to us, we take it very seriously, and we'll try to make sure that we address those things extremely quickly so that we can help you with your deliverables in your day-to-day job. And hopefully it's just a beginning. We've been very lucky now to work with over 175 different operators, and we would like to work with even more. And the reason why we like it is we get a lot of input from a lot of users, and that's basically the only thing that can guide our development roadmap. So there's we have a rule in the company. It's not allowed to just sit in a room as engineers to come up with some cool feature and implement it. It needs to be requested by the user. And the priorities of the features are just literally, okay, 100 people wanted PNR DCA into the software, well, then that's going to be prioritized versus a thing that was requested by one person. Very simple. So over to some news. It's been a very, very big year for us. We've doubled the development team across all our products, actually. And on the Whitson Plus side of things, we've continued to enhance upon the features that all of you use and love today, whether it's type well or comparison plot. Comparison plot is a great example of a feature that's been probably 10 times better from last year, where you now can integrate a GIS plot. You can add forecast from PNR DCA or regular DCA. You can do aggregation, averaging, etc. And now, as of late, also cross plots, bar charts, etc. Also on the newer front, we've added in basically merged GIS and filtering. There's kind of a joke in the software space that every software in North America starts with a map. I don't know if you guys have heard this, but people are very spatially aware, and a lot of the problems are kind of linked to things spatially. So to be able to filter on all kinds of parameters, whether that's well attributes or physical attributes or custom attributes, and also do that spatially, is something that we've doubled down on the last year. Forecast Manager. It's so fun. If you haven't used it, like 16 wells at the time there, and just spray gun fit the forecast with whatever you want to configure it. It's. I'm trying to teach my 6-month-old son this. He's getting there, but he still needs to work on the setting. But it's addictive. And associated with that, you can compare forecasts, statistics related to the forecast, and filter to forecast that you're like, oh, these probably look a little suspicious. I compare the forecast from last quarter with these ones, and the EUR or whatever cum 5 years are a little bit different. Let me double click and view those. Also, group forecasting. Some people don't like to individually forecast wells and then aggregate them, but just like aggregate them at once and bulk kind of forecast that one stream. Totally fine to do, and that also is capabilities we've added into the product in the last few years. I'm going to double click a little bit on something called PNR DCA, and it's one of these topics that we had a webinar last year. Most popular webinar we ever had in terms of like it actually triggering feature request. I had a list in my Excel sheet, and it counted over 350 people requesting to get that into the software. And then I was, okay, probably we should go in and get it into the product. And if you haven't heard about what it is before, I'm going to kind of dumb it down and teach you in a couple of seconds before I'm getting Jennifer on the stage. So what PNR DCA is, if you want a simple way to think about it, it's just pressure-informed EOR, so a secondary way to forecast your wells in addition to decline curves. It was popularized after this webinar that Oxy did, and it has actually been in the literature. If you look the last 10, 15 years, it's been in the literature, proposed by multiple different co-authors, and it's simply just accounting for flowing bottom hole pressures or normalizing your rates for that. So the problem, to address it very simply, let's say you have rate-constrained wells and you need to forecast, what do you do? And that's where PNR DCA comes into play. So you just combine your rates versus time and your delta P versus time. You pressure normalize those rates and you multiply them in this case with like a fixed delta P, and you can plot that versus either time or versus cum, which is kind of the industry standard now, to get an early time EUR. And just to give you an example of a data set we got a couple of days ago, this is actually 16 days of flowback data, so it looks like a lot of data, but it's actually not many days. It has an inclining period and a flat period. If you went in here with unconstrained B factors, the best fit would be a B factor of 10. So that's a constant, it's a flat line. Okay, so you can't forecast this guy. With PNR DCA, you start to get the declining rates from day one, and an early way to go in and forecast your wells in those situations where that matters. Okay, over at today's program, we're going to have a technical session. It's going to nerd out. We have a lot of petroleum engineering junkies in the room. I see you. You know, some of you were like looking at the equations off the lunch. That was more fun than talking to your colleagues. I'm the same way. So hopefully, if we visit your office, or maybe if I visit your home at some point and I see that in the bedrooms of your children or something, then we reached our goal with the posters. So we're going to have a technical program, and then we're going to have a happy hour at Barcelona Tavern, I think. And that's walking distance, is what I've been told. Who has people been there before? Yeah, that's seems like a watering hole here in Calgary. That's great. Session 1, it's me, just finished, Jennifer and Raimund. Session 2 is Jordan, Graham, and Daniel. And then we're going to finalize with Braden, Brett, and Ryan. And we're going to try to have quick breaks in between, but we're going to have to make them quick just because people really want happy hour. And that's why I made mine particularly quick. So with that, I'm going to welcome Jennifer. So please give Jennifer a big applause. And we're going to start this off.
All right, I'm suffering from a bit of a cold, so I'll try to use the mic here. So today I'm going to present on estimating early time shrinkage. This is a bit of a rabbit hole that our team went down about a year ago. Whitecap has assets in the Montney and Duvernay, and in particular, this is really relevant in our gas condensate reservoirs. And what we were seeing was that our production team would often put into the production software shrinkage factors that were like -20, -30%. So essentially what we were getting was that more liquids were dropping out of the gas stream after the separator than the shrinkage that we were seeing on the liquids that were actually being measured at the separator. So essentially, you're getting more liquid volumes than what you were measuring at the separator at the end of the day. So we kind of wanted to understand this phenomenon better, but also make sure that the numbers we were seeing were correct, because ultimately when you compared it to actuals, there was typically some pretty big busts in those first few months. So why is early time well production data important? So obviously, this is something that we're using for performance benchmarking. As I'm sure all of you experience in those first few days, let alone first weeks of flow back on a new pad, everybody's in your office asking how it's going. And so, there's an opportunity, or there's a risk here that if you don't have good data, you could be either celebrating unduly or potentially being a little bit nervous about the boss coming by unnecessarily. The other thing is often we're trying to make well optimization and choking decisions in those early months. And then ultimately this does and can impact revenue and cash flow forecasting, and I'm going to show some examples of that. So we're here at a Whitson session, so obviously there's a tie to PVT on all of this. And one thing that a lot of us have come from a conventional background, and so working with these complex fluids is a little bit new. In conventional assets, typically there's one PVT. That GOR is a function of your reservoir pressure, and it's pretty simple. Then you get into working the unconventional assets, and you very quickly realize that every well has a unique PVT. That GOR is a function of flowing bottom hole pressure. Your producing stream compositions are changing rapidly for each well. On top of that, even across a pad, well to well, we've seen dramatic changes in fluid composition. So even across a pad, you can have very quick changes in the mole percent by component. And ultimately, all of this means that you need to characterize each well appropriately to make sure that you create the proper original phase envelope. And the way you can do this is obviously using an EOS model and Whitson Plus. It also allows you to honor the drawdown path so that you can calculate your shrinkages on a daily basis. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time with these. These are like literally straight out of the Whitson training on PVT, but essentially just highlighting, black oil is pretty simple. And often when you've worked conventional assets, a lot of times they're pumped off very, very early time. So it's very simple in terms of trying to characterize and allocate production. When you get into your volatile oils, it becomes more critical to, again, correctly define that phase envelope so that you can get the correct bubble point pressure. The drawdown path on these wells, because they're so big, often the drawdown paths can be different well to well or pad to pad. And then once you drop below that bubble point, you have a non-linear relationship between your volume of liquids and your pressure. And then finally, you get into gas condensate, which is your most complex fluid system. And again, defining that dew point pressure properly is pretty critical, but you also have a phase of condensation and then flipping back into a vaporization phase. And this is where things get really crazy and you start to see these negative shrinkage values, which really make you scratch your head until you stop and really think about what's happening with your fluid system. So these are a couple schematics of the typical measurement layouts that we would have in the field. So scenario one is where you have all of your wells on the pad where you have the wells coming into a separator, and you're separating off your gas and your liquids, you're measuring those, and then you're recombining them, sending them down the line to the gas plant inlet. And this is what we call the fat gas. The other option some people might have, we have this, for instance, in like our glauconite wells that are also gas condensate, would be where we're metering and actually tanking the field condensate on site, and then sending a less fat gas down the line to the plant. And so what we really were trying to understand, specifically in this wet gas scenario, so most of Whitecap's pads, we have pad separation, we're metering that gas off the separator, the liquids off the separator, and then we're sending all of it recombined down the line to the plant inlet. And what we were trying to understand is what's the right shrinkage value to put on that liquid component to get the appropriate C5 plus total liquids at the end of the day. So what are the key Whitson tools that you're going to need to do? So we went, like I said, down quite a rabbit hole and had a lot of help from Whitson trying to understand how to do this in the software. And ultimately, they created a few new exports and calculations for us as well. But the very first thing, if you are interested or want to understand this better for your own wells, is you need to go into the compositional tracking and click on the settings there, and then you want to activate the advanced compositional run. This will give you additional calculations that you don't normally see in Whitson by default. And then the first export that you're doing is related to understanding the shrinkage of what of the liquids that you actually have at the separator, so that field condensate component. And Whitson is pretty cool in terms of it actually calculates daily. So if you've got your separator pressures and your separator temperatures coming in daily, you've got your liquid rate off that separator, it's calculating based on the EOS what the shrinkage factor is daily based on the pressure and temperature that the separator is operating at that day. So there, right away, you're getting better resolution on your shrinkage than you would if you were just using kind of like one flat value. What this shrinkage, again, and what this liquid number doesn't capture is all the liquids that are still retained in your gas stream. And especially early life, often we're running our separators at high pressure, and there's a lot of liquids that are still carrying over in that gas stream. So the big number that you can get out of this first export, which is on the shrinkage page, is the raw field condensate. So you actually have to do an export and a calculation, because you have to take the stock tank oil number that Whitson exports and the shrinkage factor that they calculate, and you actually have to make that back into a raw number, because you're not interested in the shrinkage on just that liquids component. You want to add it back into the total C5 plus. And then you need to try to figure out how much liquid is remaining in that gas stream. So to do this, you run you look at the NGL tab, and you're going to set your NGL efficiencies to basically 100% for your C5 plus components. And so then Whitson again goes through, it uses the samples that you've provided, the pressure and the temperature, what's already came out at the separator. And for that gas stream, it calculates the remaining C5 plus component that you should be seeing for that well. And then as a final step, you need to add those two components together. So you're going to take your condensate, your field condensate off your separator as a raw number. You're going to add in the C5 plus number, and now you have your total liquids, which you can calculate a shrinkage value from. So it requires a little bit of exporting and spreadsheet work, but you can get there. And so this is some of the outcomes of what we saw when we went through this exercise for a few of our different pads. So this first example is a Duvernay example. And what we were doing was comparing, using Whitson, what the shrinkage values and total absolute values should be for total condensate versus what our internal estimates were in our production management software. And so what you can see here, let's see if I have. So in the light blue is what was estimated out of Whitson. And in the dark blue is what we were carrying in our production accounting system. So you can see that's a pretty huge delta. And when you went in and looked at the details in terms of what was being carried for shrinkage, there was a minus 20% shrinkage that had been carried for 3 or 4 months. And then somebody looked at the actuals and said that needs adjusted, and it was adjusted to minus 10%. And then that was let ride for another 4 months or so. So causing some pretty significant error in terms of what this well's performance actually is. And so the impact in this case over the 8-9 months was about 14,000 barrels was being over allocated to this well. The other thing we took a look at was just sampling frequency. So again, recalling that your compositions change very rapidly with early time, and then that can have a big impact on your shrinkage as well. We wanted to take a look at sampling frequency and how much that was actually impacting the production estimates. And so this is another example where we just compared the Whitson forecasts in this case, because we know there's a lot of error with how things are going into our production estimating system. In this case, we took the same well and ran one scenario where all we used was the initial sample from flowback. And then we compared that against where we had 5 different samples over the first about 8 months again of production. And so what you see here in the dark blue is the single sample, the absolute rate, and then the shrinkage factor in the dotted dark blue. And then in the light blue is where we had 5 samples. And so on an absolute basis, just with scale here, it doesn't look crazy. But when you look at shrinkage factor, you can see that it's widening with time because, again, like you had a sample from early time, and then the error, more and more error is getting introduced with time. There's probably about a 3% difference here, but that impact, again, is it's not nothing. It's about 1,500 barrels under allocated in the first 6 months. When you use 1 test as opposed to the 6 or 5 tests. And then it's, again, this is for 1 well. So when you start multiplying this across a pad or across an area, it can be pretty significant. And then the question I got back from our production team, our measurement team, was, you know, what about actual sales? Because this is fine, but this is production estimates. And really, at the end of the day, we just care if we're getting paid the right amount. And we know that the gas plant's doing it correctly. And so this is an example of kind of what it looks like from a sales perspective. And so what we did here was we actually compared, Whitson created a new raw gas for us. So doing the molar balance on what the plants typically report is raw gas. And we could compare that to what Whitson calls fat gas. And so we found that generally at the inlet, that number was pretty comparable. So what the plant was saying for raw gas and what we were calculating for fat gas, they were reasonably close, within a couple percentage points. But then when you started to look at the total C5 plus, there could be really significant errors. And we attribute this to ultimately the plant has an actual liquid volume that they're selling, and they have to allocate that back. So regardless of what's kind of coming in the inlet, they have to allocate that, and they have to allocate it based on the gas samples that the operators have provided. And so if a lot of samples haven't been taken more recently and you've got a lot of wells that are carrying an artificially high condensate ratio, they're going to get over allocated condensate, which means it's going to take away from people who have sampled more frequently and aren't showing as high. And one of the ways we see that this is a problem is when you see a new well come on or a new pad come on and it's quite rich, and then all of a sudden all the wells go up in condensate production. That's sort of a hint that there's some inherent error in that the samples that are currently provided don't maybe represent the wells. And I think just what really stands out here again, you want to tie this all back to value. For the 2 pads that we looked at over the course of 5 months on average, the net impact, and we did this for sales and gas, the net impact overall was about $500,000 lost. So what are the takeaways from all of this? So obviously, number one, you have to correctly characterize your wells so that you can do proper shrinkage calculations, so that you can get proper well production numbers, and ultimately you can try to track and understand if you're getting the revenue stream that you should be from your wells. It's really important that you understand where your data is coming from, what the field processes are, and where the potential for error lies. Error can be introduced through infrequent sampling. So the guidelines are pretty loose measurement. They say that you have to sample until you reach stabilized flow, but there's no definition really for what is stabilized flow. For a lot of operators, that just means, you know, the well's not slugging by the end of flow, by the end of test. Not resampling when production conditions change. So when the field flips from a high separator condition or a high pressure separator condition to a low pressure separator, that's again a trigger for a resample. Group separation is obviously a bit of a problem because you lose resolution there as well. And ultimately, even when you do it all right, if other operators at your same plant inlet are not doing it correctly, you're going to have error. And so action items that we kind of identified within our own organization is to increase sampling. So what we do right now, and this kind of came through collaboration with Whitson, is we recommend sampling once per month for the first 3 months when you're really coming through that high drawdown phase, and then going to once every 2 months for the next 9 months, and then once a year after that. And it's something we're revisiting shortly here, just based on, you know, is that the right amount of sampling? We'll be going through this whole exercise again to kind of tune that up a bit. You can link your raw separator data and composition data right into Whitson Plus, so definitely you want to do that. We have a lot of issues we see with tester data as well. One other thing we are just finalizing is actually pushing data back out of Whitson and into our production software so that we do have better shrinkage estimates on a regular basis. And then finally, one of the big things I think out of all of this is having those conversations with your operations team about when do you actually need to have individual separation for wells on pads early time. So, you know, when we're running pilots, often the incremental production that we're hoping to see is in the single digit percentages, right? Like we've changed a frac design and we think maybe we're going to get 3% better or 5% better. How can you hope to see that if in this kind of error in your production data? So this is really, really critical when we're trying to pilot new ideas and optimize. And that's where I think it's really important for the reservoir and the production people to get together to say what kind of testing facilities do we really need to have on the pad. And that's it. So I just do want to give a shout out to Mathias, who is like extremely helpful with this whole exercise. Some of the reservoir engineers on the team, Raj and Neil, and then the production accounting team answered a million questions around how we measure these wells and what is raw gas on a Qbyte report. And so definitely a big shout out to our PA group.
Working? Excellent presentation. I just have a comment as opposed to a question. That's why I waited. Obviously, if equity varies across the field, the inequity of the distribution of how you spread the wealth eventually reaches a cum until someone wakes up and says, we need to rectify this. Mm-hmm. So if others in the room aren't thinking about equity, add that to the slides. On fat gas, I do have a question. You talked about GeoScout, aka Petronix, data only having fat gas. Most of us, for most of our careers, have not had the liquids until the last 2 or 3 years in Alberta, 5 years in BC. When you made that comment, do you realize I noticed your later slide had C5 and Condi on it, comparing to what you're booking. Just wondering if you've done a bunch of work with that, and in an A&D setting, it would be very valuable.
Sorry, I'm not 100% clear on the question. I just want to make sure
You said that GeoScout only had fat gas. I was just wondering if you'd compared, because at a well entity level, it's now available in the last few years for all operators, and it's publicly available.
Yeah. We did do some of that comparison for our own wells. So yeah, same kind of issue. GeoScout's usually like what I was saying there is sales. It's very close to that. Sometimes we see little weird things with inventory and whatnot, but we did a comparison from GeoScout to our own internal and to Petronix, and they're all very, very, very close.
Rashid Sohail from Amintif. So when you were calculating shrinkage factor, you were adding the gas deep cuts like C3 to C5 plus and the liquid 2. And then are you calculating shrinkage based on the sum of the two, or is this the right approach, or you just have to do with liquids?
Yeah, so we weren't including any of the other NGL components. The C1 through C4 components were not included. And so it's just the field condensate, what's dropping out in the field, and then also using Whitson to estimate the C5 plus component that would be in the gas stream.
Just have you seen empirically like where this is more important, like fluid systems, initial reservoir pressures? Like, is there some areas where this is way more important than others, or kind of similar across the board?
Yeah, we haven't done that work. I think we kind of ground through this I think we did about 3 pads and sort of then focused more on what's the solution and how can we support the production team using better reservoir tools like using Whitson Plus so that we can provide better shrinkage estimates. So that's sort of where we focused our efforts. But it would be a good exercise to go back and see how different the error is depending on that CGRI value. Thank you.
Very good, very good. So need to thank Dave is also in the room. Where's Dave? I think I saw him, Dave. He was the one that got me on the shrinkage train back in 2018, I think, or 2019. So it's this is like life coming full circle. We're gonna get Raimund up. He has also been flying in for this from BC, right? Vancouver Island. Okay, so he made an effort. So please welcome Raimund.
Okay, I'm a reservoir engineer for Teine, and I guess I just want to talk about the impact of downhole chokes on wellhead liquid yields in the condensate window. Maybe this is obvious to all of you. It was not to me. If this is boring, let me know. Teine, I want to say, is a reasonably recent entry into the Duvernay at scale. We're essentially halfway between the major development areas in the Fox Creek and Williston Green area. So we're kind of in our own area in the middle there. We have anything from GOR of 500 to north of 10,000, and so full spectrum of the fluid windows. And what I want to focus on is a well that's sort of like in that 6,000 to 7,000 initial GOR. And I would think that the learnings that we've deduced from here, what's in this data set, is probably also applicable to Montney wells. So maybe something for non-Duvernay operators in here too. We started using downhole chokes on some of our wells early on just because of the very high pressure differential between wellhead and the separation facilities. Joule Thomson effect is not a good time to work with in the winter. And so just run a couple of downhole chokes, mitigate all those operability issues, and just take that cooling effect down at reservoir temperature rather than at ambient. And so we were working on a step-out pad. So this is a single well. It's got its own dedicated separator by that extension. And so any of the changes we made were very much trackable at the sales terminal. There's no proration issues. There's no sampling issues. So this is very clean data. And I think that's the only reason why we caught this. And so I'm going to get into this chart in a bit more detail on the next slide, but essentially my color coding throughout will be red is essentially a separator gas stream. The green are separator liquids. Black throughout is tubing pressure. The golden is a casing pressure. Showing on the split graph below essentially is my separator pressure in gray. And then my separation temperature in purple. And then just that dashed line is essentially where things are starting to freeze off on us. And we initially ran into this well with 18/64 downhole choke. We thought we were in the volatile oil window. It's a step out. Got to equip it with something. And then found out, of course, it's a retrograde gas. So completely oversized choke really didn't do anything. And I think that's important. We did pull that choke after about 8 months. We ran bottom hole gauges in the tubing, wireline conveyed just below the choke, so it's not affected by the choke, and it gives us a very good tie back to modeled flowing bottom hole pressures in Whitson. And what's of note is when we pulled our gauges at about 7.5 months before they would expire, we saw about a 900 kPa increase that day on the tubing to before, while we're on a steadily decreasing casing trend and a essentially fixed gas flow rate. So that's really the DP we were taking across that choke, nothing, 0.9 MPa. We then operated through the better part of the spring without a downhole choke. Everything was great until our plant went down, or rather Vermilions, for a 4-day outage. And so we had about a 4 MPa increase in the tubing pressure. And when we brought the well back on stream, we had frozen our separation facility shut, and that was in mid-June. So like, okay, well, we're going to have to operate with a downhole choke again. Stuffed to 1464 in the hole, got great flow temperature in the 20s. But what you'll see, and we'll look into this a bit more, our tubing starts to do funny things. Plant goes down again, got a 9-day build up, build about 9 to 10 MPa, stuffed to 1264 in the hole. And then all of a sudden we started to lose liquids. And at that point, we're like, oh, there's something going on here we should probably dig into. And so that's what I want to talk about here. So looking at this in a bit more detail then, so we're essentially starting in this without downhole choke period here, so ignoring that 18/64 period. What you'll see is that your wellhead liquids in light green here, they generally follow your casing or your tubing. Now, this is a gas well. The annulus is 100% gas. Your liquid level is confirmed on bottom. And so this is a very typical behavior where the two correlate, and we'll get into that a bit too. What I've annotated here, the tubing in black obviously is what you'll measure off your transducers, but what I've annotated, the dashed black, is a rough idea of what the tubing would have been had we not run these different sizes of downhole chokes. And I've defined this term here, DPDHC, that's that pressure loss across the downhole choke. And so when we stuffed the 1464 in hole from one day to the next, rather than that 0.9 MPa difference positive that we've seen when we pulled the 1864, at about 55 decks, we would see about a 5 MPa difference. And then when we cut the well back to 50 decks, that differential decreases to about 3.7. And what's actually quite interesting is that our liquid yield is increasing at the wellhead. So we're producing less gas out of this well, but we're making more liquid. And at first, that's kind of backwards, right? And then here's where things kind of fall apart. There was actually an 11/64 in the hole for one day, but we could barely get the well to flow, so we pulled it back out, ran to 12/64. So what happens here within a few days of bringing that well back on, it was actually fully choked. I couldn't actually make my target of 45 decks, so you can see it's tailing off. And I have essentially a DP here on the order of 10 MPa. So we're in critical flow. This choke is fully choked. It's sonic. This is essentially maximum producibility across this choke. And this is when we start to see all of a sudden on SCADA, about 30% of our liquid just as a step function disappears. I'll show it on the stock tank side next, but the positive step change once we pulled that choke and replaced it with 16/64 is also true. So there is very much a very strong correlation between the pressure differential across the downhole choke and the C5 plus condensate yield in the tanks on site. We ran a 16/64 after because we knew at an 18/64 it was barely doing anything for us. We know that a 14 is still too tight. So that 16 is really just in case the plant goes down so we can get our well flowing again. So we get some temperature back out of the hole. So that's kind of our fail safe. We'll probably drop on the order of 1.8 MPa over it. So some amount of losses will be required with that. Looking at the stock tank level, so I mean, here's a type curve for this well. It's very well behaved. When there is sub 1 MPa pressure loss with that 18/64, your 7-day average on this well is trending slightly above type, slightly better above type once there's no pressure loss at all. So that kind of goes around with that correlation. As we're starting to draw 3 to 5 MPa with the 14/64, we're starting to be more or less on type, so it's a negative impact. And then once we run the 12/64, the wheels kind of fall off the bus, right? And then we pull it, and then we're back onto trend. Focusing just into that pink box here, the 2-week average leading into this was essentially 16.3 cubes a day of condensate at an average gas of 45 decks. During the period when that 12/64 was fully choked, we dropped to about 11.9 cubes at 44 decks, so really like comparable gas rate, but about a 30% change in yield. And then conversely, once we pulled that choke, we increased to about 17.5. So it looks like when we're at sonic condition in that downhole choke, we lost on the order or gained on the order of 30% of our wellhead liquid yield. And that's very significant. I mean, this well is a ways down the depletion curve. We're talking about 35 barrels a day. If this happens while your well is making 100 cubes of oil, that's a very significant loss of income. And so the question really becomes, where did those liquids go? And so this goes back to your sampling frequency. Luckily, we were better than once per year, but essentially we had one taken at the very beginning. Then we've taken one during the period where we had no choke in hole, or rather the 18 in the hole, then multiple at the 16s, a 14 and the 12. And so what's nice with this setup is that, again, this is a step out well. So we have one well contributing to the sales gas stream. We're sampling the sales gas stream, so we know exactly that it's only this well that's affecting the composition of the sales gas stream. And so if I'm looking at the C5 plus liquid content, for the example of this sample right here at the end before we pulled the 12/64, it showed us 144 milliliters per cube compared to the first at the 16/64 showing us only 16 milliliters per cube. And so I've gone back through all of our sales gas analysis and plotted essentially the liquid content in the sales gas stream versus your downhole choke diameter, and you actually get a very well-behaved curve. Now, there is, if you will, I mean, you could fit a bit different curves through here, but essentially it is a less pronounced impact in subsonic conditions, and then really escalates once you reach that sonic condition. And so if we kind of back check the math that we've came up here, right, like minus 4.4 plus 5.6, 12/64 at 144, 16/64 at 16, the differential being 128 mils per cube at 45 decks, 5.8 cubes. It all goes around. So our liquids are in the sales gas stream, and that makes sense. They have to go somewhere. And so Vermilion is capturing that, and it's not like these liquids are lost, but it goes back to your sampling frequency. Unless you're sampling that well every 2 to 4 weeks while you're doing these games with your downhole chokes, you will never be credited for that. Now, they were nice enough to actually agree with this presentation here and have credited us back in the meantime, but I think it goes back to you got to really be on top of your gas wells because they will change radically if you at all approach sonic conditions on a choke. And so really, I think if you want to optimize your value, just keep your condensate on your tank, know what your downhole choke is doing. And so at that point, I kind of like took over to the Whitson side. First, I guess, on what did Curtis think of this? So back in 2012, Curtis Whitson published a paper, and it demonstrates a very close correlation between the wellhead liquid yield, which he called OGR in his paper, and P well flowing, which is essentially this black curve here, but essentially black and blue are tracking each other. This is in a log time scale. But the takeaway was, and this is a quote from the paper, the producing OGR tracks closely the FBHP, a fundamental characteristic of all liquid-rich shale wells we have studied. And so that dependence of wellhead liquid yield on FBHP is nothing new. This is well established, and our current example is no exception to that at all. So what I'm showing here is essentially the flowing bottom hole pressure in black, that is Wallis-Amayat and Gaillard from Whitson, and then the measured bottom hole pressure for our gauges in gray until we pulled those. We ran a second set of gauges, so we pulled those again when the latest set of data I have, I guess, is when we switched from the 12 to the 16. We still have gauges in the hole. And so the OGR from actual tank sales very much overlays that correlation, right? Until we reach the point where we're at the 10-ish MPa differential, where we have essentially this unknown deviation from the trend. And so at 18.5 MPa, which was our confirmed flowing bottom hole pressure and also predicted, very good agreement there. I ballpark that DC THP at about 10 MPa. It's probably more like 9.5 because 10 MPa would be, I think, 58% of the upstream pressure. You can't do that. At about 52 to 55%, depending on ideal gas and deviation from that, you go sonic. So it's confirmation, however, that essentially we have a shock, or rather we've got a sonic condition at the throat, and importantly, shock waves downstream of the throat. And we'll get to that in a second. What does that mean? And so I've tried to struggle with this for a long time. And what is the dependence of wellhead liquid yield on PVT path? Because it's real. And so this is the actual core lab based on core lab's measurements of the PVT analysis that we've done on this well. This is the phase envelope they generated based on the tuned EOS. And so, I mean, we can kind of play this game where we say, okay, here's reservoir temperature, here's reservoir pressure, and we're taking this well down to where we had measured about an 18.5 MPa flowing bottom hole pressure. This is real. This is where we're sitting. And we then run a downhole choke, which takes something like 9.5 MPa downhole. It's pretty well isothermal because it's unlimited heat sink down there. So the cooling effect doesn't really occur. And after that, we're taking some amount of pressure loss on the way up the tubing to the separator. And essentially, it says that we will stay somewhere between the 15 and 20% liquid yield at all times. If at that point we say we pull the downhole choke, we take that 9.5 MPa at surface across our wellhead choke, then we will obviously have our decrease in the pressure on the way up the tubing. We get into something like 45% liquid immediately upstream of the wellhead choke, and then we take that 10 MPa and it takes us back to the separator at the same condition. Why are they different? And you can say, well, I've spent more time in one path versus the other path, but the separator is the separator and the tank is the tank, and they're ideal, they're the exact same conditions. And so I am not certain on this, but I think that the fact that once, and we don't see this in volatile oil wells, more importantly. So this I think ties back to this. Once you have substantial pressure changes across that positive beam choke, that convergent divergent nozzle, you'll have a very rapid pressure increase due to the deceleration downstream of the nozzle in the tubing. And for a retrograde gas liquid, right, it's condensed as we went down in pressure, that sudden pressure increase will lead to secondary re-evaporation. Whereas in a volatile oil well, as you bring the pressure up, you would just try to bring less gas out of solution, but it's already out of solution. You'll never get it back in. And so once you take that to the extreme where you have a shock wave, you have essentially discontinuity almost in your pressure profile. And so you have very rapid, number one, droplet fragmentation through that shock. And then those reduced droplet sizes will essentially flash back into the free stream. And so I can't put that in writing. It is, I think, fundamental in observation that goes around. But I'm happily to entertain any other explanations for that phenomenon. But I know it's real. And so really the actionable takeaway for this is that don't use a downhole choke just purely because you're trying to increase your operating temperature. If this is like a safety precaution for well washout and all that kind of, by all means, but keep in mind that you will likely pay a price for it unless you're always sampling that well and you know exactly how to attribute that value of that produced liquid back to yourself. And then maybe look at line heaters at surface instead. So that's kind of the story on the physics there. I have a little addendum that was more like Whitson bottom hole choke tuning related. We got kind of lucky in the way here again that like we have like gauge pressures, right? So that's our black data here, tubing and casing, as you guys all know from the bottom hole plot. And then so Whitson plus default for choke discharge coefficient is 0.75 with the disclaimer saying tune this. But generally speaking, it has to be less than 1, even for an ideal gas, because there are irreversible energy losses at the throat where you create entropy. And certainly once you have a shock, that goes even more so. So it should be less than 1.0. Since we have that pressure data, we can essentially tune these choke discharge coefficients. And so if I put in 0.75 on an 1864th, 1412, and 16, you can see that I'm over predicting the flowing bottom hole pressure. I get very good agreement, and this is an untuned W and G correlation, so I haven't changed any of the hydraulic head or friction coefficients. This is just what comes straight out of Whitson Plus. So excellent agreement in the absence of a choke, but essentially the smaller the choke diameter, the bigger the discrepancy, and just in discontinuities between choke sizes, and that tells you something's wrong. And if I go through and I started playing with this, I ended up with a 1.0 for every single one of these chokes. And then you get absolutely stellar agreement with your flowing pressure that you measured. And so to me, this was a surprising result because that would suggest that you have no compensation requirement for that irreversible energy loss at the throat. Doesn't really go around with gas dynamics. And that's really a question for Milan. And so I just wanted to flag it, I guess, so you guys are aware of it. So that's all I've got on that. So questions or comments, I'd be happy.
Not a hard one, but I remember when we worked a lot on like ECM and stuff, and we tried to, let's say, take a late sample and try to reconstruct kind of the compositional path to the in situ fluids. What I realized there is, like, at least for these unconventional wells, the flowing bottom hole pressures, especially when you're below saturation pressure, it becomes like it's almost like a step in the separation process that you need to account for. So when you saw these differences in surface CGR, did you try to just simulate like basically I guess a 4-stage process where you just add the bottom hole conditions as like a stage in the separation process, and just compared with or without the downhole choke, where you basically just treat it as a separator and see if the CGRs were different? Did you try that?
I haven't done that. I mean, the reason why I haven't gone down that road yet is because when I look at, right, this is my chart. I no longer have that, measured pressure right here, but from one day to the next, that flowing bottom hole condition is the same. There is no difference from one day to the next for the intake pressure at the bottom of the tubing. It's only a change downstream of the choke, right?
Yeah, well, I was just guessing that in that one case where you have the choke, you would basically add that choke temperature and pressure. I guess the pressure is probably similar, but the temperature would not kind of that choke separation would not be there in one case versus the other. I'm just curious to see how that will be, but I'll go and nerd out about that later. And this is actually pretty interesting too. It's spooky, good results, too good.
Yeah, I did not fake this data. I was surprised too.
Okay, we're going to take a 5-minute break, and I'm going to be strict. You don't want to see me strict. Braden, see me strict. It's not pretty. And we'll get a little bit of coffee, get a little restroom break, and just go out, chit chat, be back, and we'll talk soon. Cheers.
Thank you.
Boss, we good? Okay, we need to find our seats again. I told you I'm going to be strict. Okay, we're going to get started. Need everybody to sit down. I'm kind of happy with how the order of the presentations have kind of turned out because, you know, Jennifer went through shrinkage. We're going to talk kind of implicitly about like shrunk volumes now with Jordan. For those who don't know Jordan before, does anybody see who he looks like? There's another guy in the room, but it's okay. If people don't see it, it might be the beard. Makes it simple for us. This is a true story. 2 years ago, Jordan Bowie, Braden Bowie, and myself, we wrote a paper together. And we did a lot of work in the weekends on teams. And Lucy, so my fiance, she would tell me, are you talking to one person or are these two different people? Because their voice were so spooky similar. So I had to keep teams up with like their faces going to see actually, okay, that was a comment from Braden versus Jordan. Anyways, enough about that. Hopefully it gave us some time to get seated. And Jordan, the floor is yours.
Perfect. Thanks, Matthias. So yeah, my name is Jordan Bowie. I'm a reservoir engineer at ARC Resources, and today I'm going to be talking about peeking over the fence with pass files using public data in Whitson Plus. So a little bit of an introduction, a bit about me. So I'm a reservoir engineer with ARC Resources. I'm not the Bowie famous for the Bowie diagnostic plot in Whitson, but I do share about 58% of his DNA. And I like to think that our long conversations about RTA at Christmas dinners helped lead to the development of this plot, much to the chagrin of our wives. Yeah, a little bit about ARC. So we're a Canadian oil and gas producer, almost exclusively producing from Montney assets, approximately 410,000 BOE per day of production. And then a little bit about this presentation. So I'm going to start with what is a pass file, and then how you can use pass files in Whitson Plus, and then finally why you might want to do that. So first off, what is a pass file? So pass stands for pressure ASCII standard. So as you can tell, it's a file designed to store pressure data. It's an ASCII file, which means it's just text. You can open it up and read it. And it's a standard that's maintained by the Alberta Energy Regulator and the BC Energy Regulator. There's many types of pass file. There's GAN, ON, and WAN files for gas analysis, oil analysis, water analysis. DST files for drill stem tests. GRDs store static and flowing gradient data. Then you have TRGs for transient gauge data, such as buildups, AOFs, defits, etc. And then finally, you have PRD, which is a production data, which is basically just for flow tests. And so right now, Whitson supports direct import of PRD pass files. So that's what I'm going to be focusing on here. And so you're probably thinking right now, why should I care about this text file format that the government mandates? Like, how does this actually affect the work that I'm doing day to day? And so the convenient thing here is that because reporting your results in pass format is mandatory, anytime you do a flow test, you need to be reporting that to the government in pass format. That means that if you go for your own wells, if you go into your well files, you've already got your format, your flowback data formatted and ready to go. So there's no manipulation of your data, massaging it, getting the columns right to import into Whitson Plus. It is ready to go. So all you have to do is go into Whitson, go into the well that you want to add your flowback to, go edit data, click pass on the top, upload production, find your pass file, double click, hit save, give it a couple seconds to work. It's doing some thinking in the background. And all of a sudden, boom, there's my flowback data. It's all hourly data. You got rates, pressures, ready to go, no manipulation required. So you want to look at one of your wells flowback, you can do that fast. The slowest part is finding the pass file in your well file system. But if that's a problem, then you need to talk to your IT team. So then you've got this flowback data. Why would you want to use hourly flowback data? So one of the things I found most useful in Whitson is you can take this hourly flowback data and estimate your initial reservoir pressure using their IPR method. And I found that the IPR method works okay with your initial daily production data, but where it really shines is with the hourly data. So you go in, you filter to the first 1 day of flow. It gets a pretty nice trend on that IPR curve. You click AutoFit and boom, you've got an initial pressure estimate calibrated to this well. You could go through, if you think you have parent-child depletion on a pad, you can look at your initial pressures on child wells versus parent wells based on production data, and it's just super quick and convenient. Another thing you can do, as Jennifer was talking earlier, comparing wells on flowback. So we can upload data. I've got 4 different wells here. But one thing with flowback tests is the data is always on shrunk volumes. These are just your separator volumes. But when you import the pass file, it's also importing those separator conditions. And so then I've got oil volumes on the left and separator pressures on the right. I can see that for these wells, for some reason, that red well, it's flowing at around 6 MPa separator pressure, whereas the other ones are all in the 3 to 4 MPa range. And so then Whitson, based on the initial GOR of those fluids, estimates a PVT window, applies a shrinkage to those. And so if you got a new pad coming on, your managers are laser focused in the first few days of flowback, for better or worse, you want to at least make sure they're looking at shrunk volumes that matter. You don't want the well that's flowing through a high separator pressure to look better than all your other wells, and then all of a sudden people get excited and real production starts coming in and you're in meetings. No one wants that. So applying that shrinkage is really useful. Also, because in Whitson you can be calculating bottom hole pressures, we know that not all wells flowing back are flowing at the same bottom hole pressure profile. So I've got the oil and gas rates and oil on the left, gas on the right, but we can calculate bottom hole pressures at every time step, and then we can start plotting up normalized oil rate and normalized gas rate. And now when we're comparing our wells on flowback, we're comparing apples to apples. We've got shrunk volumes, we've got pressure normalized, and so we can say if this well looks better than its neighbors, it's not because of the separator conditions, it's not because of the drawdown, this is actually looking better. Now you might be saying, I guess that's sort of interesting, but maybe we already have our flowback data in a unified, easy to query database that's already flowing directly into Whitson, so loading a pass file easily, that doesn't help me. Or maybe you say, initial pressures are interesting, but we gather tons of defits, we do buildups all the time, we can estimate initial pressure on lots of our wells. Or maybe you say, we don't focus on flowback data because our management is extremely patient. They understand when a new well is coming on. The long-term production is what matters. Looking at the first couple hours of a well is not indicating anything. So that I say, especially to that last one, I am jealous if you're saying that. But at this point, there's still a lot more you can do with these pass files, because the best part, kind of given away by the title of the talk, is that all of this data is publicly available. This is not an internal proprietary data set. So say I've got arc land in yellow here, and let's say Whitecap drills a pad right next to us. So I can go into GeoScout, and if I wait a couple months, I can open up the production. I have, because of the sales volumes, I can see the gas and sales condensate volumes. I don't see pressures. That's pretty critical because we know that pressure, looking at rates alone without pressures, that doesn't really tell you much about a well. But I can also in GeoScout go in, look at the QFind documents, and boom, there's the pass file. Just download that, upload it, and into Whitson. The deviated survey, that's also public data. The casing design, that's public data. So can't see tubing, but during flowback, most wells are just flowing up casing. So I can calculate bottom hole pressure there. And now if I want to take this and compare it against an adjacent arc pad, say my manager's saying, Whitecap's doing something different. How is that affecting their wells? I can get an initial estimate here. It's only for the first week or so, but every once in a while you get someone who for some reason, I'm sure there's good reasons for it, but they end up flow testing a well for 2.5 months or something. And then now I can download that data. This is a relevant well, upload it. I now have 2.5 months of hourly pressure and rate data. Now I get a chance to use my favorite diagnostic plot here, plot it up, put my flat line on here. I can estimate an LFP. Now I can directly compare that to our wells for more than just a week. And I can normalize that for tonnage, fluid, length, all that's public data in Canada too. So we can now really peek over the fence, really get an idea of like what's going on with our competitors' wells. So in conclusion, because the standardized pass format that the government requires us to submit all of our flow tests, because of that, it's quick and easy to import into Whitson. There's a lot of different ways we can use this data. We can do initial reservoir pressure estimation, comparison between flow tests, accounting for separator shrinkage, and flowing pressure changes. And then all of the competitor data is fair game. This is not just for your wells, this is for everybody's wells. So just one more reason living in Canada is the best. And with that, that's about all I have. Happy to answer any questions.
Have you looked at like the gas side? I know you talked about Vogel there, but like the CNN stuff as well, particularly on the IPR, we've done a lot of that as well, using the pass import. We tried to like correlate that C term with other, you know, like lateral length and stuff like that.
Oh, sorry, which term?
Sorry, you talked about Vogel, but on the CNN.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I haven't actually. I've mostly just used the oil, but yeah, that's definitely something I haven't really experimented with. I usually, when I'm looking at the hourly data, I find a pretty good correlation straight line back. But yeah, that would definitely be something to experiment with on the gas side. Like, does the gas tell you the same thing as the oil? I guess usually you see gas before you see oil in the flowing. So
yeah, I think we just explored the gas side. We haven't played too much with the Vogel side as well. I'm just curious. Thanks.
Yeah, no problem.
Another question? Maybe we should try to like move this guy around. Maybe people will become. Yeah.
This is a shameless plug.
Okay.
But yeah, Dave Sorkamo with ARC. So I think I was in Jordan's office and we were talking about this. Wouldn't it be great to get pass files into Whitson? So I think Jordan that afternoon sent off an email, and I think it was maybe within 5 days or less that boom, we could upload pass files. So
Appreciate that. Oh, your beer. Actually, question to Jordan while I walk over there for that question. Is there any of those other standard formats that would be valuable for us to support, or are they just not as interesting?
So I would definitely like the ability to drop in the GAN, OAN, and WAN files, because if you, like, we have our initial samples right now. Generally, if you want to enter in, like, there's all the different ways to initialize your PVT. We usually tend to do just GOR, and API because it's simple, and because maybe that's point in time sample, it's hard to say how representative that is. But when we do want to use, say, a gas composition and an oil composition, when we have our analysis done, the lab always gives us these GAN and OAN files. So if we could just drag and drop those in instead of copy pasting or manually typing out of a PDF, that would be pretty slick.
Good answer. Question on the PRD files. So when those are coming in, there's a lot of ancillary fields that are available to you, like salinity, % sand, like choke size, some of those things. Are all of those properties being successfully imported? Maybe this is for Whitson as well as it is for you. And are you able to, I guess, like manipulate and play with some of those ancillary fields?
So right now, I'm pretty sure it's just the rates and pressures coming in. There is comments in there as well that I think could, when they built this, I don't think the production comments were something in Whitson, but that might be something to revisit. Because there is comments in there and say, I was flipping on that well that was where they had like nearly 3 months of flowback data. I was looking at the end and I saw like the LFP jumps at the end, like what happened there? And so then I was able to open up the text file and just read down, and it said like well shut in due to plant issues. So I was kind of hoping I'd go in there and be like, oh, they milled it out or they did a clean out, and no, just came on better than, but yeah, so it would be cool if they brought in some of the comments or those other fields.
Dave?
Is this valid for certain version of pass file? Because in the older pass file, every pass file has a different format, like a different nomenclature. Like sometime it says meter pressure, something like that. I
can't say for sure. I know I've pulled in pass files from like 2013, 2014, and they went in without a hitch. So I don't know. I think it's a pretty old format. I'm not sure when it's been updated over time. Could be too that some of those other fields like salinity, maybe those are new, might not be constant, but I think the gas, oil, water rate and the pressures are pretty consistent. I've never had any issues if there are compatibility issues.
Probably I have seen pretty old files.
See that? And suddenly everybody has a questions. I need to just change to this format.
I don't really have a question, but I can clarify the pass file. It took me 3 or 4 hours to code the summary table, which is the sum of all meters. The comments and salinities, H2S, those goodies are in the meter table. So it takes a little more coding, but you can get at them. And the pass file version came out in 99, I think around 2005 or something like that. It was modified. Most of our modern horizontal wells have come on streams.
Makes sense.
I'm so sorry. You need to save the questions for the next presenter. I'm sorry. Okay, big applause to Jordan. I think the next one is Graham, right? Yeah, I'm going to turn this off.
Hey, everybody. Do you guys see my my light on here? All right. So I know I've got this fancy phone, but I think the flashlight's probably the thing I use my phone for the most. Usually because I've dropped a 10mm socket into my engine bay and I'm trying to find it and fish it out with a magnet. And then I drop my whole phone in usually. So believe it or not, back when smartphones came out, people downloaded flashlight apps. Okay. And there's still people out there using their flashlight apps nowadays, but believe it or not, like the app on the phone, it's convenient, but you can even change things like the like how wide the beam is and all these kind of crazy things, right? So what I want to talk about today is really all the nodal advancement that we've put in the software in the last year, because it's kind of like the built-in flashlight app is we've tried to make things easier and faster for production engineers, but most people don't even know that it exists. And so, you're relying on spreadsheets or something extra. So I want to maybe, turn on the light for you guys today about what's new with nodal in the last year. Now I know the title is learnings, but really it's learnings that we have had from all of your feedback. And so I just want to highlight again what your feedback has meant to us and what it's happened in the software in the last year specific to nodal analysis. Okay, so one of the things is this idea called average IPR. And so, when we create a snapshot of the well's rate and pressure today, we can kind of recreate those conditions. But is today's rate and today's drawdown really representative of the well's typical, performance? Because we're just sampling the most recent day, but if the well is having a great day or a bad day, it could really misrepresent the well's productivity. And so one of the ways we deal with that is we say, well, let's show what are the most recent 10 days of rate and pressure look like, because if you picked, the best day right here in the last 10 days, you get this really optimistic IPR. If you pick the worst day, you get like this kind of bad IPR. So this is kind of exposing the danger of just picking one day to represent the well's productivity and kind of the range of what those IPRs could ultimately look like. And this could really over or underestimate the response if you change the drawdown on the well. So the way we've tried to solve this for you is say, okay, give me my average IPR. All right. And so this will do exactly that. And you can change, which period you want to sample it over here, right? Create the average among a few different points. So this is just what this really means for you is you're going to get a more representative IPR, even if the well rates are jumping around. Now, if you happen to have a bunch of wells and you want to do that kind of in a bulk mode, you can go ahead and, create an average IPR for all my wells, pick over what time period you want it to make the average from. So ultimately, this is really just to make your IPR more reliable and more representative of the well's productivity, all right? The next thing is this whole idea of bulk running sensitivity. So if you have a bunch of wells and you say, what would happen if I lowered the well pressure by 100 pounds on all the wells? Or if I increased the gas lift rate by 100,000 cubic feet per day on all the wells? To do that manually with different VLPs would be quite a time-consuming process. So with this bulk run idea, you can say, okay, I want to lower my wellhead pressure by 100 psi, and I want to make it a nice color for the VLP. And I'm going to either put a fixed value for my new wellhead pressure, or I want to apply like a delta from the current wellhead pressure, or I want to change the gas lift rate in some way. So in this case, I'll say, what if I drop all my wellhead pressures by 100 pounds, like that? It's going to start bulk running a new VLP on all of the wells, so I can quickly see, what is going to be the result of that. So if I go and pick a random well that it's run it on, now it's automatically created my new VLP. I look at my next well. So you can do this on, wellhead pressures, on gas lift rates, on all those kinds of things. So just again, one of those kind of flashlight items that you probably didn't know about, just to save a lot of time. So probably the most popular thing, at least in my world for the last year, is this idea of a gas lift curve. Do we have any production engineers in the room? Yeah, all right. So the whole idea of a gas lift curve, if you don't know, it's trying to build a relationship between how much gas lift we inject and what the liquid rate or the reservoir rate will be. As you start to add some gas lift, hopefully that gives a lower bottom pressure, so it predicts the oil rate will improve. And then the peak of this curve is basically the highest liquid rate you can get from the reservoir at some gas lift rate. The X is basically where we're operating the well today. And then the peak is where we could be operating it. Now, the thing is, as you probably realize, you get diminishing returns, right? As you add more gas lift, you're not going to see as much of a rate response as this line flattens out. So the first economics in Whitson is for gas lift. Thank you. And what this does is just let you put in the oil price, the gas price, and then what is your lift cost. And that will add basically the most economic point along this curve to run gas lift. So you don't have to wonder where's the most economic place along that curve. So you can do that in bulk mode too, but just a nice place to put some economics into it, right? Now, once you've done a bunch of gas lift curves for all your wells, you may want to start ranking them, which well is going to be the most responsive to a gas lift rate change. And so, if anyone uses these results, you might have used it for reporting which wells are liquid loaded, right? But you can also start reporting which wells are going to respond the most to a gas lift rate change. And so these are the current oil rates the wells are producing at, the current amount of gas lift that they're receiving. But what we really want to show is the uplift that we can get. So let's see, oil rate uplift. So this is basically showing that the well's currently at 400 barrels a day, but we could increase it by 200 barrels per day if we went to the peak of that gas lift curve for that particular well. So how much extra, gas lift we would need to inject to see an extra 200 barrels a day. So really, this is just ranking the wells based on how much reservoir rate response they could get. Some wells have very low opportunity. Some wells have higher opportunity. Now, really, this is assuming you have infinite gas supply to add more lift to all the wells. But really, the next thing we would want to do is to say, how do we distribute a limited supply of gas lift? When we have many wells that share a common gas lift supply, I want to know how to best distribute the gas lift for the highest liquid rate. So this came in about a year ago, and the whole idea is you pick a group of wells that are sharing a gas lift supply. In this case, they have 3.5 million gas lift to share among multiple wells. And we say, tell me how to distribute that gas lift. And so what we're seeing is that the current oil rate that these wells are producing, when you add it all together, it's about 1,400 barrels a day. These wells are getting 3.3 million cubic feet of gas lift today, and this is how much each well is getting. But what if we redistributed how much gas lift those wells are getting, honoring the total supply that's available? And so what we're saying is if we for this well, we're injecting 216. If we went up to 600, this particular well would see 160 barrel a day rate response. Now, because we have to keep the total supply of gas lift the same, some of these wells are actually going to see a reduced rate because we have to take some of their gas, give it to wells that are going to respond better to it. And so ultimately, this is really just this multi-well gas lift distribution thing. Now, a few companies have really taken this very far in the last year, where they are using weekly data, the field conditions, bringing it in here, and assigning the optimized gas lift rates out to the field to keep all the wells in their sweet spot. And so we're even writing a paper with Devin about this year for ERTech. So I'm sure we're going to have like a WhitCon or some webinars about them utilizing this. So I think for gas lift people, this is solving a lot of problems where you have to manually try to do this iteration, and it's pretty painful. So this has been one of the big changes in the last year. Okay, chokes. All right, we had a good choke talk earlier today. So again, a lot of people don't know you can do this in Whitson. So this is a well that's flowing up casing, and if we installed some 2 7/8 inch tubing, we're going to get a little bit of friction. We're going to back out the well a little bit, but we delay liquid loading. Now, what if we installed like a large choke, a wellhead choke? Okay, 40-60 force, a smaller choke, a smaller choke. So these are all wellhead chokes to try to plan to see what the rate's going to be. Or what if we put a 25-60 force wellhead choke in versus a downhole choke? So you can start to compare wellhead choke versus downhole choke. What will that mean for your rate? All right. Now with downhole chokes, they've historically been a bit of a problem because if you have a packer in the well, how do you calculate the daily bottom hole pressure with a downhole choke? It's really tough. And so that's something you can actually do right now. So when you're describing your historical well bore, you can go ahead and say what size the downhole choke was through time, and ultimately take your tubing pressure through the choke to get the bottom hole flowing pressure. So even for downhole choke wells, this is a big deal. It's kind of a pain point I had in my past career trying to get those bottom hole pressures with downhole chokes. Does anyone use jet pump here? No? All right, we'll skip that. So, erosion, this is a good problem to have, is that you've got such a high rate well, you have to worry about erosional issues. And so what you can do now is basically the red rate is the actual gas rate. This is our Turner or Coleman, liquid loading rate that we need. But now you can also see what your erosional rate is, and if you've exceeded it, if you're getting close to it. So this is again a big deal if you just want to do some quick checks about if you're getting close to that erosional rate for your well. Okay, plunger lift or gapple and things like this. So part of the issue with plunger lift is it's intermittent, and the well's not always flowing. And so how do you calculate the bottom hole pressure for a well where you have a plunger in the well? So what we do now is you can put in how long the well is open during a cycle, how long it's shut in, and how long it takes for the plunger to travel. So what this does is it takes what the cumulative production is for the day, and it tries to convert it into the instantaneous rate during the plunger's rise cycle. And so again, we think while the plunger is rising, that's the closest thing that we have to kind of natural flow for the well. So we take those conditions and that instantaneous rate to calculate the historical bottom hole flowing pressure. So this isn't really here to optimize your plunger lift plan. It's really just to get a better bottom hole flowing pressure for wells that are on plunger lift, okay, or gapple. ESPs, okay. So most people who have ESPs have a pressure sensor on the pump inlet, right? But for people who don't have that, it can be nice if you could calculate the pressure through the ESP. And what we've added is about 600 different ESP models that have been added in here now. So if you pick your ESP model, you can put a couple details about the ESP in here, and it'll basically use the surface pressure, calculate through the ESP to get the bottom hole flowing pressure. So this is useful for two reasons: getting the bottom hole flowing pressure when you don't have a gauge at the bottom of the ESP, or if you're considering changing your ESP to a different model, you can pick it here and see how that new rate would be on your IPR curve. Okay, so this has been pretty handy for people who do ESPs. I think we went through those really quickly here, but again, all of these developments are really from you, and hopefully it's kind of been like the flashlight moment where, oh, okay, I don't need that flashlight app on my phone anymore, right? There's something that's actually built into my iPhone, or in this case, Whitson. Mathias said we hired a lot of people in the last year, and a lot of them are software developers. Now you might be saying, okay, what's coming next? Okay, fine, I'll show you. So one of the difficult things with production engineering is these IPRs. They're just a moment in time, right? They're a snapshot of today. And if we're going to do some sort of change with our well bore, we want to know what is the 6-month cumulative improvement or the 1-year cum going to be from that well bore change. Okay, that can be something that's historically required, like a really complex, like a numerical model. I need to make a numerical model to predict that, and we're trying to come up with a way that's a lot more efficient and approachable for production engineers, because I don't really know many production engineers who want to mess around with rel perm curves and all this stuff, right? So one of the ideas that we're working on right now is kind of a physics and empirical way to predict future productivity of the well. And so there's 2 steps. On the material balance side, we're going to define the size of the reservoir or size of the tank. And that can either come from your flow material balance or just like a volumetric, tank size, right? You can choose how you want to define the tank size. We say how much has the well cumed so far, and that will estimate what the current reservoir pressure is for the well, right? So original fluids in place minus the cum, we get our current reservoir pressure. So we take that current reservoir pressure, and the way we represent the well's productivity is to saying what's the current drawdown, the current rate. That's like a snapshot of today. And so we basically create an IPR VLP curve for how the well is operating today using the current reservoir pressure. So the idea here is we're going to forecast the well for 1 month at this rate. After 1 month of production, we can subtract what that cum would be at this rate, and watch the red line. We can calculate the new lower reservoir pressure with 1 month at that rate, right? Just material balance, how much have we cumed at that rate? So now we have a new reservoir pressure and we have a new operating point. So this is just the material balance topic, but this will let us produce a rate forecast for the well. And the cool thing about this is a pressure sensitive decline. So if you decide to schedule any sort of wellbore change, drawdown change, artificial lift change, we're going to predict what the rate response is as part of this forecast, because there's an IPR in the background of all this and a material balance tank. So that's really solving one problem, just the material balance part of it. But you're thinking, well, Graham, I don't have boundary dominated flow. And these IPRs, if you want to assume a constant productivity, that's really only true in boundary dominated flow. So when we have these long transient flows, we need to tackle the topic about the shape of the IPR changing as the well's transient continues, as the productivity keeps changing. And so who here uses PNR or kind of dabbled in it, pressure normalized rate a little bit? Okay. So PNR is kind of like a version of productivity through time. So one of the ideas we have is to empirically forecast the well's productivity through almost like a PNR, where we're plotting productivity index on the y-axis, but we're doing it a little bit fancier than the normal way, where we're using a pseudo pressure for one, and we're not just using the initial reservoir pressure, but we're going to calculate productivity using what is the average reservoir pressure through the well's history, and that's going to give us a bit better productivity interpretation. And so this is really just an empirical decline of well productivity. So when you couple the future productivity of the well with the depleting reservoir pressure through this material balance tank that we're talking about, you can couple these together. And this, we hope, will give a really practical way to create future IPRs and pressure sensitive forecasts for your production engineers. And the goal here is to do this without a reservoir model, which requires interpretation and time. So right now we're working on kind of the material balance part of it that I showed you. And then what's going to come next is this transient part. The whole goal is to automate this and give production engineers something that's practical. Okay. So again, if today I really just wanted to show you guys kind of what the last year of nodal development has looked like. And if you're still using like a flashlight app on your phone, I want to just let you know that there's something built right into Whitson that can do all these things that we kind of showed today. So hopefully you can take advantage of those and keep the feedback coming. There is a nodal course on March 25th that's going to cover all of this. March 25th, it's online. So you can either go to whitson.com/training or contact me. It's free. Or I'm happy to come into your office and do this as well. And that's it. Thank you.
Just a question on the future IPR.
Yeah.
You kind of said you don't expect the production engineer to necessarily go in and do a reservoir numerical model.
Mm-hmm.
But in Whitson, the reservoir engineer might have gone in and done a calibrated reservoir model
Yeah.
for that well. So I would think there would be some way to leverage that work for the production engineer to benefit from.
Absolutely. So if a reservoir model has been built, it's been calibrated, that can be the reference model to do everything I showed you here. So there's going to be really two options, this kind of empirical way or the full physics way. You'll have both options. One thing I should mention too is we know that like the CGRs, the GORs on these wells change through time, and so you may already use like the ratio forecasting in Whitson. So the idea is to do like a GOR forecast, a CGR forecast, and that'll be part of this empirical way to try to account for changing ratios as well, just FYI. Yeah.
So we're definitely going to accommodate for that. The only problem is, in some companies we only work with production engineers, so they don't have a reservoir engineer to actually give them that answer. Any other? Was over here, Gaurav? Yep.
Thank you, Graham. Just a quick question on that assumption of 1 month for the transient flush production to get those transient IPR. As the CGR varies, like there was some work done by S&P like 4 or 5 years back for developing the transient IPRs.
Yeah.
So the question is, as the CGR is dropping and the GOR is increasing, you think it's a better idea to have those dynamic number rather than just like 1 month? And if there's any recommendation, like maybe if the GOR crosses 8 or 9,000, we might need more time for the stabilization, like 2 months or something, or as compared to just a thought.
Yeah, I think where you want to create a more rigorous pressure sensitive forecast, you're going to want to use the numerical model. So this is more like a fast automated way if you want to skip the numerical model. But if you want the rigorous prediction of ratio changes based on drawdown on phase envelope, you're going to use the numerical model for that.
I saw there was some unanswered questions, and we will prioritize those in the next ones. I think so we have one before we're going to take another break. It's going to be a short break. You all know this. But we have our friend Daniel. Where are you? You're over here. He's going to talk about water disposal modeling, which is, I actually learned that a lot of companies up here inject into even horizontally fractured wells. So we're including that in the software very soon too. But excited to see what you're going to talk about.
Yeah, first of all, I want to say, so many familiar faces around the room. Mathias and the team really know how to get people together. My name is Daniel Sang. I'm an engineer at Logan, and today I want to showcase a practical workflow for water disposal modeling using Whitson. As many of you are well aware, Whitson is used for solving PVT and RTA problems. But today, I know like recently, Whitson has built out capabilities for water disposal modeling as well as PTA. And so I'd like to showcase an example well that I've stepped through to solve for water disposal problems using Whitson. So a little bit about Logan. We're a small company of now 27 employees, originating from the spin-out of Spartan Delta in 2023. We have various assets across the Montney and Duvernay, spanning a wide range of fluid windows, and expect to produce about 16 to 17,000 BOE a day on average this year, primarily focused on development at Pouce Coupé and Simonette. So ultimately, we want to get to an 80-20 solution using Whitson. And why? Water disposal is not sexy. But these formations, a bunch of them produce a lot of water, such as the Montney, as a byproduct. So we need to be able to predict disposal capacity and also predict the timing in which we might hit some of these pressure limitations so that we can properly plan for potential CapEx spends in our FFD. This could be potentially multi-millions of dollars in your CapEx, which could otherwise be spent drilling more wells. So how do you do this with limited time and human resources? At Logan, we're a small company, so we don't have access to expensive software, we don't have access to full-blown 3D reservoir simulators, and we want to come up with quick and actionable results. There's so much to do, so we want to come up with something quick and simple. Luckily, Whitson started building this out for water disposal modeling last year. It's a bolt-on to the numerical model. And as Mathias has mentioned, there's been a lot of improvements through time. Initially, it was for vertical wells at 100% water saturation. And later, they've added in horizontal disposal modeling. And later, after that, they've added in the ability to add gas saturation and skin, which I'll talk about. Also new is the PTA module that they've added. So starting to be a one-stop shop there. So just some background on the well in question. It's a vertical well in our Simonette area, which has production history. So it's produced from 1999 to 2007. We acquired the well and converted the well to an active disposal well. And so we have a few knowns. We know the initial reservoir pressure prior to production. And then we also conducted a bottom hole static gradient prior to injection. So we know the pressure at the start of injection. So you can kind of see that on the plot there where we had some pressure depletion due to production. Some of the constraints that we might run into could be regulatory, technical, or operational. And in this case, because this well used to be a producer, we've been given limits by the AER for reservoir pressure. So the reservoir pressure has to be below the initial reservoir pressure. And so that's that dotted red line for the AER pressure limit. We've also been granted a MWIP, a maximum wellhead injection pressure. But this well in particular is pump limited at the surface and injecting far below the MWIP. So that's a operational constraint that we have. So some of the objectives and key questions that we have are, what is the current reservoir pressure after this period of injection? And then by extension, how much capacity is remaining in the reservoir? And if there is significant capacity, if it's not a technical constraint, can capital be spent to upsize the surface pump instead of drilling another new disposal well? So do we actually have an operational constraint instead of a capacity? And lastly, we can also determine if the well is damaged. Should any remediation take place beforehand to improve injectivity? And we can see that from the skin factor. So ultimately, we want to see where we are on which curve we're at and how much capacity we have in this well. So the workflow that we'll take is, number one, a production history match. So this well has production history, so we can analyze the reservoir parameters, conduct normal conventional RTA, and log some of the inputs for disposal modeling. And in this case, we can determine the reservoir extent. Then step two is building out the initial disposal model using Whitson. So this will give us initial estimates for modeled reservoir pressure, skin, and provide us a forecast. So it's going to tell us initially where do we think we stand with this model. Step three, we can obtain field data. So we can conduct pressure testing, do a injection fall-off test, and conduct some PTA to actually get estimated reservoir pressures, skin, etc., where we can use that as input into step four, which is a recalibration of the model to generate a tuned forecast to ultimately make decisions off of. So starting with step one, production history match. So this well produced from 1999 to 2007. That's the history there. And you can just step through your standard RTA process. In this case, you can see on the type curve plot there, the production history was in boundary dominated flow, and you can identify the flow regimes there too. And from those stems, you can also identify the dimensionless reservoir radius and back out your reservoir extent. But I find that looking at those stems is quite subjective, so you can step through the typical RTA process, do your flowing material balance. In this case, it's a nice straight line for your 8 BCF of SRV. And then you can use that and history match that well and actually back out of about 600 meters of reservoir extent, just stepping through your typical RTA process on your production history. Step 2, this is going through the initial water injection history match, so using Whitson on your actual disposal history. So we're going to make a match on the water injection rates and try and match bottom hole pressures. And in this case, we're using that reservoir extent as a history matching parameter. And you can see that stepping from a wider or a larger reservoir down to 600 meters gives us a better match on the bottom hole pressures. And that lines up with what we actually saw from our production RTA. So from this, we can use that model and create a forecast. In this case, you can see the bottom hole pressures in black. They've been constantly rising, so we can forecast that to what we predict to be our maximum wellhead injection pressure. And on that dotted gray line, you can see we've matched the initial reservoir pressure that we got from the start of injection, and we now have an estimate for the modeled reservoir pressure. So we have a modeled reservoir pressure, we have an injection forecast, but in this case, at the time, Whitson only allowed for 100% water saturation. So we do know that there may be some limitations in this specific model. So Whitson has since added additional functionality for skin and SG input. But for now, we know that this is just 100% SW in this reservoir. So what we can see is our reservoir pressure is climbing towards that AER pressure limit, and maybe it's a little bit sooner than we expect. So it kind of looks like the reservoir pressure is higher than expected. And again, maybe it's due to those initial model limitations. But from quick inference, we can see that our initial opinion of what are our main constraints, capacity versus operational, it does look like it is more of a technical capacity as opposed to operational, as our reservoir pressure is climbing quicker to that limit than if we actually upsized the pump and increased pumping capacity. So maybe the decision is not to upsize the pump and spend capital there. So some of the drawbacks in this model are no pressure leak off in the model on the edges, so you can't add aquifers or influx to the model edges. As I mentioned here, there's no skin input, which has now been added. So this is to understand potential damage and decide on a remedy. And then here, there's only 100% water saturation. And so as we know, compressibility is a major factor in forecasting any pressure trends. So what do we do from here? How capacity limited is this well? Are the parameters accurate? And if so, if they are accurate, then we need a plan and drill for another disposal well soon. So the next steps here are to gather the field data in step 3 and then recalibrate. So what we did in step 3 was conduct an injection fall-off test in this well and conducted PTA on this well. This was done in external reservoir software. However, as Mathias has mentioned, the injection fall-off analysis is coming soon to Whitson Plus. So here, standard PTA, you can see wellbore storage early on, and we do have radial flow by the end of the test. Using the radial flow equations and a pressure extrapolation, you can see that we are able to obtain an estimate of reservoir pressure, estimated skin, and estimated permeability. So some of the observations so far from conducting an actual field test are we have observed that we have more capacity or injectivity than initially modeled. In other words, the reservoir pressure from the fall off is lower than our modeled reservoir pressure in step 2. And that's possibly due to the lack of gas saturation input from the previous model. And so we have significant more capacity at this reservoir pressure below that AER limit. We also have an idea of skin. So this well is properly stimulated and not damaged. It has a skin factor of -4. So it helps rule out remediation for near wellbore damage. So we've learned quite a bit from this analysis already. And then as for permeability, permeability estimates are in line with expectations. So just something to adjust for when retuning models. So with all of this information, we can bring all of this to step 4, which is recalibration of the model. So for this retune model, Whitson actually added those some feature additions. So I was able to add in the skin and gas saturation here. And so that just improves the model to better fit the physical conditions. So some of the new inputs that we have are the reservoir pressure from the model match for the model match and the negative skin input. So on the bottom, you can see the updated history match with the fall off. That blue point is matching that reservoir pressure obtained from the fall off analysis. And now you can see that there's significant more room for the reservoir pressure for injection. So overall, because of these inputs on reservoir pressure and skin, it's improved the confidence in the model. And the results show there's additional capacity compared to the initial results. But still, it shows that the technical limits still outweigh the operational limits. So looking at the plot here, it does still show that the reservoir pressure is climbing more than the limits on the surface for upsizing a pump. So no need to spend capital on upsizing a pump. And then on top of that, no need for new disposals in the short term for this leg of the field, which saves us millions in year capital to allocate to drill more wells. So we can actually continue using this well, look at our water balance for disposal needs, and still see that we won't be at our limit this year. So that pushes things out in terms of what we had budgeted. Going forward, additional tests are recommended. So whether that's from AER requirements for annual pressure surveys or operators just voluntarily conducting field tests for calibration, it's recommended to just retune the model from time to time. So some of the conclusions: water disposal can be conducted quickly in Whitson Plus to produce the 80-20 solutions and can save millions of dollars in your capital. If you do have production history, a history match can be used to obtain initial parameters for modeling. And models can help you understand the main constraints, right? What is your main constraint? Is it technical? Is it reservoir? Is it operational? Is your well damaged? You can help plan for that when you conduct these quick and dirty models. And finally, field data can be gathered and to recalibrate the models. And as I mentioned, the fall-off test analysis can soon be done in Whitson Plus, so you can give Hamid a shout if you want this sooner. Some of the drawbacks that I mentioned, again, it's a simplified model. It's just to get to a quick 80-20 solution. It doesn't build in the complexities if your analysis warrants it. No pressure leak off in the model or leak off outside of the model edges. And then one potential improvement that I would suggest is just to add a wellhead injection pressure limit for forecasting instead of just bottom hole pressure. Because I know that many operators just want to run it at close to MWIP and just see how the well behaves. So that's all I had for today. Special thanks to Mathias, Hamid, and Anna for helping me build this and helping add a bunch of features along the way.
Good. I sent that was a feature request, right? The last point.
Yeah.
So I sent that to the team. So hopefully we'll get it in soon. Question?
Hey, hi, Amir here. So I just want to, can you elaborate a bit more? Like you mentioned, like there was only option of 100% water saturation. And as I understand, this was a depleted oil and gas well. So you probably have some hydrocarbon saturation. How software is using, what kind of method is using to calculate average reservoir pressure if there is no hydrocarbon saturation?
Yeah, so the initial reservoir pressure before the start of injection is an anchor point that I use, which is based on a static gradient test that was done. So we know that data point, but for future modeling for reservoir pressure, the only input initially was 100% water saturation, which leads to for your model to have too low of compressibility and too great of reservoir pressure build than what is happening in reality. In reality, we knew that this was a gas producer and has gas saturation. And so once we had the ability to actually input that, then it can properly reflect the compressibilities of this reservoir and help us match that better.
It's tough.
Probably this is a question for you, Mathias. Any plans for coming up with the multi-well water disposal schemes?
I knew I should have gone that way. You're just talking about having injection as an option in the multi-well numerical model. Yeah, I think that's a good feature request as well. I'll note it. Can someone send that to the support ticketing system? Like if I say if I say it to the developers, they won't believe me. You guys need to use your own voice. But I think that should be the first thing that we're getting very soon is to, in the multi-well numerical model, just the regular one, being able to inject water. And then that seems like the next natural point.
Thank you. Very nice presentation. Just following up on a prior point, maybe about trapped gas. And as you go from production to injection, which is drainage, to maybe imbibition, do you think there is hysteresis effects that might come into play? And how does the software help you with that, if at all?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think that the initial production history match gives a good starting point. I was expecting to see some hysteresis effects where that reservoir extent is probably going to look different under injection than production. But I think it was a coincidence that we didn't see that. There's probably other parameters where you see a greater hysteresis effect than the reservoir extent, but I didn't see that for this specific parameter that I landed on.
We need to do a 5-minute break. I promised that. And then we're going to do the last session. And you know what we're at right now? 2/3 of a happy hour. So we just need to get back here with a lot of energy, an empty bladder, maybe a cup of coffee, some water, and we'll be back to it here in 5 minutes. So I'll be strict again. So in 5 minutes, we'll see each other. No, I agree. We're doing kind of similar things now with like the retract that you can actually one month of the run. We're putting these the actual clusters. That's felt like yeah, I agree. No, it's good. But definitely I think the change of water injection stuff should be pretty low hanging fruit. Yeah, exactly. Okay, beautiful. Good. Make sure everybody's back for this. Yeah. We've got 2 more minutes. See, I don't want to miss. I don't want them to miss anything in the beginning. This looks fancy. But good. It's been a good turnout.
Yeah. I kind of thought this was like decently smaller than WhitCon. It's like, yeah, it's not that, like WhitCon's obviously bigger, but it's a good show up here.
It's like it's over 100 people.
Yep.
So that's not just a third of a WhitCon.
So you're doing a Whitson Europe one?
Now it's got to be kind of maybe up to 40 people.
Okay.
It's like whitCanada was a few years ago. It's hard to kind of do it big when you don't have that many clients. Now we have so many clients. Makes sense. Yeah. Small. Start small. Start small.
We'll have to give Daniel a hard time for showing some harmony plots there, though.
Yeah, no, he did it on purpose. The harmony. It's okay. It's he actually asked if we could get it in before, so he could add those plots. Good. Huh? Yeah, let's do that. Okay, we are gonna get started again. This is the last session before happy hour. All our friends. Maybe if I sing, maybe people will hear. If I do like maybe not. Maybe a Norwegian song, people will be like terrified and leave. Will, Graham, my dear friends in the back, Mr. Rose. Well, he has a good last name, but maybe it's not loud enough. Okay. The problem with me is that I only have one joke. I don't have two, so I need to increase my vocabulary, or like that too. It's hard to be Norwegian in the States, I tell you. You're not good in Norwegian anymore, and you're not good in English, and you just end up with something in between. Beautiful. So we're in the last session. It's going to be a lot about forecasting, well spacing, depletion, completion, and I'll just let Braden take it from here. He's going to demo our newest product, Whitson X, that we're developing together with industry. So if there's stuff you don't like, let him know so we can fix it. And with that, the floor is yours.
That's good. Thanks, Matthias, and thanks everyone for coming here. It was kind of cool earlier to see my little brother Jordan present there. So I always tell people that he may be the smarter brother, but I'm clearly the better looking brother. But so I was, you tell me that's wrong, Matthias? So I was originally born in Calgary, worked for Apache up here, working on the Duvernay Shale. In 2017, Apache moved me down to Houston, where I've been working in the Midland Basin, Eagleford. But kind of like y'all, had the problem of we have this land base we're looking to optimize. We have to decide on how many wells per section we want to do, what frac size, what's the impact of depletion, and kind of face this as a big challenge of when we were looking at different wells per section, different frac sizes, trying to run the economics of that. We were shuttling things between a lot of different systems, and nothing was really easy. We were kind of using different softwares. And so that's where kind of the dream or the inspiration of Whitson X came from, was can we take a lot of the problems that I was having, and I'm sure y'all are having, and be able to get it in a form where everything is connected. So as soon as you run a forecast, it's running economics on it. As soon as you change something for well spacing, it's changing the forecast. So that's what we're building. So this is Whitson X. This has been my baby since joining Whitson in July of last year here. So I was just going to give a quick demo, but as Matthias said, please feel free to kind of ask questions and give us feedback. If there's things you like, especially if there's things you don't like, we want to hear, because we want to build the best possible product that we can here. So in Whitson X here, you can come in, and the kind of central unit that we're going to be creating is a DSU. So we have the Midland Basin loaded here as a proof of concept, but we're actually working on the Duvernay right now as well. So the Duvernay will be here soon, and then the Montney's to come kind of soon after that. So we can come into like maybe this spot here, and we'll create a DSU. It's going to ask us for some ownership information. So it's going to be running full economics. We have the American economics, but Ryan's actually just working on the Canadian economics as well. So we'll have both there very shortly. And once we've created this DSU, we can come into the type well prediction model here. So we've taken a look at all of the existing wells in the whole basin, and we've trained a neural network to try to predict well performance given all the things that go in. So changes in lateral length, changes in well spacing, frac size. How do these correlate to both the 1-year cum as well as the EUR? So it's the neural network's job to learn how changes in well spacing affect both of those, how changes in frac size, lateral length, etc., drive those well results. So once we've trained the neural network on all the wells in the basin, it's embedded here in Whitson X so that you can come in and say, if you're looking at drilling wells in the Wolfcamp B formation here, maybe we're looking at drilling 4 wells, I'll say 2,500 pounds per foot, which I think is about 3 or 4 tons per foot, 60 barrels. So it's going to run it through that trained neural network already to be able to give us a prediction for both 1-year cum and oil EUR, and then be able to take the decline shape of the surrounding wells So we do a 3-segment hyperbolic on all the wells, take the shape of those, but the volumes predicted by the neural network here to be able to draw the type curve in green. So it's kind of neat. You have a tool that is dynamic to the exact spacing. You can change the frac size, see how that impacts the type curve here. And we have this kind of forecast explanation down here too to try to help you understand how the neural network is making its predictions, because we definitely don't want it to be a black box. We want to understand why it's doing what it's doing. So for some of the things here, like we're at a 5 wells per section spacing. So the neural network is telling us here, maybe I'll zoom in a touch, but is that it's increasing the 1-year cum by 4%. So looser spacing is better, that's to be expected, but it's actually increasing the EUR by 10%. So certain things like the well spacing are good, but it's even better in the late time volumes compared to the early time volumes. And you could see that some of the things like frac size, to a lesser extent, are a little bit more impactful for the earlier times, not as much for the late time. So you get to kind of see those impacts within the neural network to understand that. It's also quick and easy to be able to come in and have, if you have different formations or different landing zones. So we could say maybe we're looking to drill 3 wells here in the Wolfcamp A, and click save. Right now it's just going to kind of auto put the wells in, but if we want to move the wells around at all, we can kind of move them here to say, well, we don't maybe want those wells stacked, we want to move them over. You can move them up or down in the gun barrel. So this was kind of a big frustration in a past life of every time we had to try to rearrange a DSU, move wells around. It involved going to the geos to try to get them to change the wellbore surveys, exporting it out to something where we could calculate spacing. So this is all done kind of live. And every well has its own spacing done, its own depletion done. It runs it through the neural network. So everything is done on a well level. So you can see the economics by well, be able to make decisions there. You can see here that these are also suffering from a fair amount of depletion. So 16% depletion in the first year. So we have our depletion module to be able to help understand how that depletion is looking. So it's going to take a minute to load here. But what we've done is we've taken a look at all of the parent-child wells in the whole basin and use the neural network to make a prediction on each well, but with depletion dialed to 0. So given each well's exact lateral length, its exact spacing, frac size, what would we have expected it to produce if there was no depletion? Then we look at the actual production, which is then generally lower. Depletion's not a good thing. And we can calibrate that empirically to say, as you move away from a parent well, how much depletion do you suffer? As you have changes in the parent volumes produced, how does that change it? And as you move up or down in TVD, how does that impact it as well? So we recently wrote that up into a paper, so I can send that to anyone who's interested here. That kind of outlines that workflow. We want everything to be very transparent, so nothing is a secret of how we do depletion or spacing. We want to be very clear about that. And then also, if there's any ways to improve it, we want to hear that too. So this is one of my favorite screens for sure. On here, you're seeing a map on the left-hand side. Wherever you move this green line to, that's the kind of cross-section line that you're going to see over on the gun barrel view right above me here. So the existing well bores are in black. Those 7 wells that we added here are in white. And then you can see that predicted depletion degradation decaying out. So it's not exactly trying to predict like a drainage volume. It's trying to predict the depletion degradation that you'd experience if you put a well there. And we actually discovered some interesting things as we were going through too that would be different for each basin. But in the Midland Basin, we generally think the fracs of growing up. And at first, we saw actually worse degradation for child wells landed below parent wells. And this kind of seemed counterintuitive to me of, well, if your fracs are growing up, shouldn't it be less depletion below? But kind of by the same logic, if your fracs are growing up and your child well is below your parent wells, fracs are going to grow up, you're going to hit that depletion very quickly and then suffer a lot of degradation. Whereas if your child well landed above parents, you have some forces that are driving your fracs up, the depletion's driving your fracs down. We don't see as much empirical degradation. So that's being captured here, and each formation then has a different way that it's propagating out the depletion. But you can see if you look here, say for this particular well, it would have normally been expected to produce 145,000 barrels of oil. We're predicting a negative 19% depletion. And then you can see that that's taking the rate of return of this well down to 11%. So you can really quickly and easily see a depletion estimate for every single well. Does this drop it below your thresholds? You'll be very shortly able to grab the wells right on the gun barrel here and move them around. So how far away do you need to be for you to kind of reach your threshold economics? Are there certain locations that would be no longer economic? This kind of gives you a very quick and easy way to estimate that for every single well. Another kind of neat impact here is that this is because the depletion depends on a volume from the produced wells, and because we have a forecast on every existing producing well, we can say, well, what would the depletion look like at a later point in time? So maybe we type in 2030 here, and what it's going to do is it's going to take our decline curves for every single well, forecast out the volumes that we think will be produced by 2030, run that through the depletion calculation, and you'll see here that all of these will get a little bit more intense, and all the depletion numbers will get a little bit higher. So you can kind of model, are certain leases more sensitive to waiting with time? If we wait, do certain locations become uneconomic? You can then optimize with the drill schedule to be able to account for not only just the depletion for each well, but if we change time, how does that change the depletion? And again, this was a big kind of pain point in a prior life at Apache of we'd have a drill schedule and then they'd say, well, what would the depletion be like for that? It was a lot of time, a lot of guessing, a lot of rules of thumb for trying to come up with those depletion numbers. Hey, we're actually going to drop some rigs. What's the depletion look like now? Forget it. Just keep your depletion that we had before. This gives you a way to actually have those numbers and be able to optimize around that. So the last piece I'll touch on here before we kind of open it up for questions is we also have a capital model built in here. So when you change the frac size, so say in this case, it was predicting the drilling costs at 3 million, the completion costs at 3.9 million. If I make this a smaller frac here, it's going to change that 3.9 million. So it's going to go down to something lower because I'm doing a smaller frac. So the 3.9 million is going to become 2.5. It's also going to change the type curve there. So you're dynamically changing both the production side as well as the capital. And we can kind of in live time see the resulting economics here. And this is something that it's designed so that you could come in and have your own price files, your own capital model. So if a certain well at a certain frac size costs that much, you can easily tune that to reflect your own costs to be able to run those economics very quickly and easily live there. And then the next step after this is to be able to have something where you can run hundreds or thousands of permutations through and be able to see those trade-offs of at different well spacings, at different frac sizes, what are those optimals or what is that incremental capital versus incremental NPV to help make a decision on that lease optimization problem. So with that, I'd like to thank you all for your time and open it up for questions.
Hi. Have you done any length optimization within this too?
Like lateral length?
Yeah.
So within the neural network, it doesn't scale the lateral length linearly for sure. So we see like as you go out in terms of lateral length, especially beyond the 2 mile marker, your 1 year is not going up linearly. The EUR is a little closer, but still not still sublinear. So yeah, that's definitely something that you can evaluate of like at different lateral lengths, what does that look like? And it's actually kind of a neat element too of we've started on the Midland Basin, the Eagle Ford. We're just working through the Bakken right now too. But what we can do is we can take the learnings from those neural networks and kind of put it in as a starting place for another basin. So if you're in a basin or a formation, say like the Wolfcamp C here doesn't have any 3 milers, we can use the neural networks from basins that we believe would be good analogs for some of those pieces and say, let's use those to scale out to the 3 milers or in the Bakken, even the 4 milers. So use that as a starting point. So we can kind of use those in conjunction too to help on that extrapolation side. But yeah, it's a sublinear piece, so you can kind of run those different different lateral lengths there. So right now we have a neural network for the 1 year and the EUR. But yeah, we see that like the lateral length affect both a bit differently for that. And then, yeah, we're fitting the decline curve based on offset pieces, but something we could look at if you thought like, hey, I'd like to look at a 2 year or 5 year window too, to kind of see what that looks like.
Yeah, question here.
Hey.
Yep.
Holy shit. That was amazing.
Thank you.
I'm still in shock. my question, you don't even need REs anymore, first of all. You can just push a button now.
Well, someone needs to drive it. And
Yes. My question to you is, in those layers, they were all flat. Is there the capability to import geological maps if you know how the beds are dipping or what the layers look like? Or are you kind of stuck with one model here?
Nope. So yeah, the idea is that if you have like you have your own tops or anything by a grid, that each DSU is going to reflect that model. So yeah, if you have a difference in as you move from block to block, like the formation dip, you'll be able to see like where those wells are landed exactly according to your formations. And then we just are kind of showing general information now, but if you wanted to see, hey, how does a GOR change across the basin? This formation doesn't change a ton, but you could be able to load in, yeah, like a porosity map or hydrocarbon pore space and be able to, we wouldn't do it as the first pass, but to be able to train the neural network to also, as you move, like as you move right now, it's tracking the GOR is going into the neural network. It could be something that you have as a geology map that as you're moving, those are going into. So each DSU is getting its own prediction, but yeah, the kind of step 2 would be to incorporate geology on a regional scale like that.
Beautiful. And we also just acquired tops from Newtek in every single unconventional basin in North America. So if you're a small shop and you don't have geos or tops for some reason, we actually have that for you out of the box. So hopefully at some point we can provide something that's very out of the box provided to you. Here.
Hey, great talk. I guess my question would be, are you building this, and as part of your neural net, do you have your basin EOS models built in? And where I'm specifically thinking is forecasting outside of bounded cases where pressure and temperature are changing. Is that out of the box something that you can do, or is it, as you commented on, where you're having to bring that in externally as a separate layer or data piece?
In the kind of the version 1 right now, we don't have them very linked, but that's definitely in it, like where we're thinking too of. Like you can look at the temperature, you can look at the oil gravity. So we have all those pieces to be able to essentially say, like at this exact block with this temperature, the API oil gravity, what would that be, like kind of a sample PVT report or something like that. So that's we definitely want to connect those and be able to integrate all that they have on the Whitson plus PVT side and fill in anything that you can kind of quickly grab easily here. So, but if you have any other ideas there, we'd love to hear them for sure.
Hi, my name is Anton. Great tool, actually. Like I see industry going this way for long years. This is like a very nice indication what we're going. My question about the proof of concept. Have you tried to run this neural network on the, like for example, you exclude some wells which already producing and drilled, and what would be the forecast of the neural network if you just exclude existing producers, and how, if you put it empty and suggest, okay, we're going to drill these wells, like we already drill it, but we want to test it, and then how it's matching with your results. Is it like, have you tried that? Like how it's a matching?
Yep. So definitely in the training of the neural networks, we hold back a fraction, about 30% as validation wells. So try to make sure that we're not overfitting, but that would be for wells that we're just kind of holding back from the existing data set. We actually did, we've trained this first Midland Basin model with data from last July. And so also what we want to do then is take all the wells that wouldn't have been in the model since that time and be able to also compare there. So definitely want to be able to validate, like you said, how predictive of it is for new wells, not just the existing wells, and then be able to use that to improve further. So
cool. Thank you.
Yep.
And I'm going to come here, and I'm just because I'm very slow, like my athleticism is not there, so I'm going to do that. And then I think Florian, you had a question, and I'm going to do Will at the end there.
Yeah, have you run across cases where this tool is going to give predictions that aren't within acceptable bounds? What kind of situations might lead to that where this tool isn't applicable?
Yeah, so it's kind of at its core, it's obviously using empirical data. So if you're on the fringes of a play, that's going to be not as good. If you're drilling like a full out, this is the farthest well out in the basin. I definitely wouldn't want to use that unless maybe you had geology maps then where you could say, this is a further out well, but based on the porosity, carbonate, saturation or something, here's what our prediction would be. We're working to be able to have an uncertainty band in there too, so that you could say if you're in the middle of the basin like this, maybe your band is lower if you're doing a kind of a standard design and spacing, but to be able to understand as you move out that, yeah, the uncertainty band is increasing here, and probably at some point you'd say this isn't the right thing to use here. We need to kind of use a 3D model or something like that. But we're also trying to supplement it, as I said, with using basins that have more data. So say like using Eagle for data for Duvernay to be able to understand as you move there, so that maybe on the kind of extrapolation or general shape side, that we make sure it's kind of informed there to also help constrain, just for if you're in a basin with less wells there.
Just want to ask you about what's your confidence level on the economic outputs when you're looking at the completion sensitivity and the way that changing your completion parameters, changing your type curve. So would you have a high confidence, low confidence, medium confidence in the economic output? And would you use just that as your decision moving forward with operations?
Yeah, so the kind of the cool part is that when you're changing the frac size, you're changing the capital, which that's kind of an easy side of it. You can kind of code it how you want with like a fixed and variable. And then within the neural network, you're going to have some kind of like marginal return as you pump more and more. So it's going to change by location. It's going to change by oil price, gas price. But you can kind of see then if I go up a little bit in frac size, what was that like extra capital? What's the extra NPV? And then you could be able to compare on a kind of like an incremental rate of return or incremental NPV, how that was worth it. And because the kind of the costs are essentially linear, but the performance is always, there's a kind of decaying, you will reach a point where it kind of hits those thresholds. But it can, again, you can kind of see it, how it changes lease to lease to help optimize that frac size.
Okay. First question, hopefully it's a simple one, and then hopefully I can have a follow-up, just like everyone gets on the investment phone calls. Is the production training data set for the Midland Basin right now, is it Texas Railroad lease level production data that you guys have built your own allocation workflow for, or are you guys subscribing to some kind of allocated well level production data set for the training?
You can go if
I think I can, then good context, because I actually wanted to add in this. So we're actually working in a consortium-based format in every single basin: Duvernay, Montney, Uinta, Bakken, Eagle Ford, Midland, Delaware, Utica, Powder River, maybe a couple more. So it's a combination of public data and internal proprietary data as used to tune the models themselves. Follow-up question?
And then the follow-up would be if you're sort of a bigger company and you have a bunch of private data that you have, would you have some kind of subscription tier where you could have your own customized neural net for your private data set, as opposed to maybe the consortium data or some blend of public and private information?
I could take that too.
Okay.
So it's very simple. Some companies, and that's not a secret, best example is probably Diamondback in the Midland Basin. They wanted to run it single source. They have a lot of wells themselves, so they would like to provide their own internal data and their monthly data of choice from whatever they want to use there for the non-operated wells. So you can pick if you want to be a part of the consortium, or if you just want to work as like we call it a consortium of one. I don't know how we got to that word, but I like it. Any other questions here?
And maybe just as a follow-up. So yeah, each company, like you can have your own private data that the declines are built on, that then the neural network is trained on. So each company has kind of its own neural network there. And as Mathias said, if you're in the consortium, you get the benefit of using the other consortium's private data to kind of see through any allocation noise like that, like you said.
And the best example would be, the analog would be these equation state consortiums we've done, where in many of the cases you submit your own data, you get a model back that's tuned to all the data submitted, but you only see the results, and we don't share the reports of the other companies that has participated in the consortium. So it's a very similar model from that. The one thing they don't have in that team yet is posters, I'll tell you. So if you like posters, you probably have to wait a year or maybe more. But I think we'll give Braden a big applause, and then we're going to get Brett up.
Thank you.
So our next speaker is actually an old colleague of Graham. And I haven't really heard any war stories from that before. but he likes to tease me. So I'm a little bit afraid of this presentation, I'm going to be honest. But here you go, sir.
Hi, my name is Brett. I'm a development and reservoir engineer with Teine. So this was lobbed over to the fence to Mathias on Friday, so it is fresh, hot off the press. So if there's typos, don't worry about it. How this originally started was we had actually, one of the execs had asked, what is a representative B-value of the Duvernay Basin? Our reserve auditor uses 1.1 almost ubiquitously. We've seen consultants using anything as low as 0.5 up to 1.3. What's a reasonable number? So that's how I got stuck into this. So just to build background on reservoir engineering, I think it started with Muscat in the 30s when he derived the diffusivity equation. Fast forward a decade, you've got Mr. ARPS and the decline equation, and we basically just continue to evolve. So we've got quite a toolbox available to us to analyze reservoirs, analyze production data. Thank you. So moving forward, anybody recognize this gangster? Mr. ARPS himself, the original gangster. So what he developed back in 1945, we still use today. It doesn't matter if you're in a conventional basin, unconventional, SEC rigs, north of the border, NI 51-101, we're all using ARPS equation. How valid is it? Well, for conventional, probably directionally consistent results across the board. Where this falls apart is in the unconventional, because if you recall, back in the day, almost every single well hit boundary dominant flow really quickly. You had an extended period. You could draw your lines through that, no problem. When you've got a high degree of curvature with with an unconventional well, that falls apart really, really quickly. So we've come up with some, constraints, some workarounds, some rules of thumbs, etc. So just a little bit more background. I think I covered probably most of this extent, like in the unconventionals, extent to transient. So what does the beat value actually represent? Defines the curvature of your ARPS decline. And you can see on the bottom right plot, we originally started those values really low, 0 to 0.3 for oil, and then progressively getting higher and higher until you get to shale oil, 0.7 to 1.3, and shale, even shale gas, even higher than that. I'm not sure if CBM is still a thing, but it's there anyway. So how did I tackle this? Well, the first thing I did was I exported all the production data out of EVA. So EVA's a front for data. It's fed with information out of GDC Data Hub, Petronex, so it's a public data source. Exported it all from there, put it into Whitson, and I thought, okay, how the hell am I going to deal with 1,800 wells? I have done that level of DCA work before, and carpal tunnel is result from that. So I loaded it all in, and then noticed, you can see the comparison plot on the right, like the scatter in the data, there's a fair bit of noise in there. So what I did was I filtered down to anything over 18 months worth of production, and that dropped the number down to just shy of 1,500. To get there, I let the machine do the work. This is all the Whitson auto forecast engine. I hit run on all the wells, walked left, went and did something else, came back, whatever that time was later, and had this spaghetti plot. So I won't get too much into the auto forecast algorithm, but we're basically just trying to maximize R squared. And then where did I end up? Well, I swiped some of this information from a plot. Some from a LinkedIn that Mathias did not that long ago. So this is known as the Anscombes. Is that saying that right? Do you think? Anscombe? She's Belgium. So this is the problem with letting the machine do all the work. Okay, it's purely any sort of AI. It's all statistics based. And if you look at those 4 plots on the bottom, they've all got the exact same correlation, the exact same R squared, but fundamentally different scatter on that data. So I absolutely embrace the machine. I use this for almost daily in general, AI, machine learning, etc. but you can't let this thing run your life. Okay, you have to have eyeballs on it. And that's the point that Mathias made on the bottom right corner there. Always plot your data. It's the only way. Next part. So this is where the meat and the machine come together. The background plot there are the, again, straight out of Whitson. Started clicking through these. How does that fit look with these two eyeballs right here? So case in point right here, and I didn't go through all of them. I'm still grinding through it. It's 1,500 wells, so it's a bit of a workflow. But in general, the fits are all really good after I filtered down. So what does that mean? Well, first off, I just looked at the distribution of the entire data set. So we got a P10, P90 ratio. So that's giving us everything between 0.6 to 1.6. So pretty low, pretty high. Sigma, so standard deviation, pretty tight on that. And the P50B values of 1.1. It's like, okay, well, that kind of grounds the number that I've been using, grounds the number our reserve auditor has been using. But what actually impacts this? So the next two sensitivities were how B value changes with respect to net pay, or sorry, gross pay. And then on the next chart, we'll see how it affects maturity, so the phase window. So for proxy for this was just gross pay. It varies quite a bit in the Duvernay, north of 40 meters up in Kaybob. Teine is roughly 20 meters. And you can see some lower, thinner stuff as you get into the East Shale Basin too. So largely insensitive to the pay, and that I was actually surprising because I was expecting the more pay to be a higher B value, more support, going to drive that transient out longer. Sorry, oh, gave it away. I broke it. Okay, back to here. All right. So pay, average 1.1 to 1.2. The GOR band, average being 1.1. So again, largely insensitive to the GOR bands. I'm still marinating on this. Again, I would have expected the higher GOR to be a higher B value. But this is what the data says. So I'll take it with a grain of salt for now, but still continuing to marinate. Just a few concluding remarks. So in general, despite ARPS being super simple, it has absolutely stood the test of time. It has matured remarkably well. For unconventional reservoirs, I think you need to be cautious with it. You can't just go applying numbers willy-nilly. You need to put some thought behind it. What flow regime are we in? I use PNR almost exclusively to ground all of our regular DCA plots, going through reserves, etc. PNR is the go-to tool that I use. So thank you, Mathias. Thank you, Oxy, for that one. The basin-wide Duvernay wells are all roughly around 1.1. But like I said, I did filter that initial data set to make sure that I've got enough early time data to deal with that early time transient. And without a doubt, you can't eliminate the engineering judgment. Any other? So yeah, so I've already said thickness, maturity, relatively insensitive. Next step is, so this was just every single well, irrespective of where it laid in the basin, and just ran an oil forecast on it. The gas has been done and the water's been done. I just haven't gone through the analysis on it yet. So that's the next step. Next would be, and then after that would be sensitivities to lateral length, fluid intensity, proppant load, et cetera. So we can start normalizing and seeing what the impact of the completion data is. And then when I've got those buckets done, you know, the next one is, what is your terminal decline? I remember working in the Eagle Ford, there was I'd seen a couple papers that were done on the terminal decline as a function of spacing. So if you're 40 acres, it's X. If you're 80 acres, it's Y. I'm not sure if that holds. We're creating within the Duvernay, we are absolutely creating our SRV. There's limited communication outside of that fracture network, but that's next on the list. So that's the concluding remarks. And then the next one, I wanted to introduce the new OG. And I say this from the heart. I honestly, in all my many years in the industry, I don't think I've ever seen a club or a cult or whatever you want to call us that has come together as much as Whitson has brought us together. So thank you for that, Mathias. I think it's a hell of a platform you've got here. No. that was it.
Is this AI?
No, that's yes.
Because when I took your photo and I uploaded to AI, you looked better, but I'd say the same thing about this photo. Okay, question over here.
2 words, parent, child.
Yep.
Comments, please.
Function of spacing. So I think that's also work to be done. Children at 500 meters are different from children at 300 meters. So that kind of comes, I don't know if I put that in there or not with a spacing, but that's one of the things on the hit list is how spacing affects that, because I think that's going to tie to the terminal decline to an extent.
Because I think us mere mortal humans perhaps easily overestimate that relationship.
True story. Yeah. Yeah.
Are you noticing difference in B factor based on the flow regime in the well?
Higher earlier time for sure.
So you have several segments in your forecast.
This was so again, just to eliminate how many variables, this was just 2 segments. So your initial and then a transition to, and I have fixed a terminal decline on this. So it's just a 6% terminal, 1 barrel a day cutoff, and then the machine fits through all the early time.
Okay, yeah. When we do the Duvernay forecast, we normally use like I think 3 segment, which is like a linear flow, which is with a high B factor, which is 1.3 or whatever matching. And after that, when it's flow, flip to the transition flow, which is like a longer in Duvernay if you produce more gassy wells, right? Like you need to reduce your B factor to match the curve.
Yeah.
And after that, the terminal multiply.
Had that conversation with Braden at WhitCon in the fall, because they correct me if I'm wrong, but it's a 3 segment that you're using for your forecast or your DCA. Like I said, we use 2, but the linear flow is actually a really short period of time. We've done flowback analysis on, I think, just shy of a dozen of our wells. So that's giving you that really high resolution look early time, and it's almost inconsequential.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
And you can actually do both. So in the when you preset kind of the auto forecast, there is an option called transient hyperbolic, which is basically you can define what you were talking about. If you do that exercise, just make sure you also compare it to whatever Brett is doing now for your wells, especially with monthly data. When you use transient hyperbolic, it's very easy to overfit your data sometimes. So you will actually get worse results than if you just use the 1 segment. So at least the work that I've been doing on my spare time. I don't know if there's any other questions. Seems easy. People are like, aren't we at like 8/9 of a happy hour now? Big applause for Brett. So last presenter is Ryan Hassan. I didn't know Ryan last year when I was here. But he was pitched to me as the other Braden from the Apache days. So we were sold as we did whatever it took. We threw in the kitchen sink to get Ryan on board because he knows Canadian economics, and that's very complicated apparently. So the floor is yours.
All right. Thanks very much. Also well aware that I'm between everybody and alcohol, so I'll try to go as fast as I can while making this somewhat intelligible. So Mathias asked me if I could speak a little bit on optimizing field development economics, and I started, as one does, philosophically, and I went through Nietzsche, Schopenhauer, Spinoza, and landed on Schreck. And I wanted to say that optimization is kind of like an onion. It's got layers. And what I mean by that is you can go so many layers down these rabbit holes, and I have spent so many hours thinking about it myself, arguing with other reservoir engineers, arguing with planners, arguing with CFOs about all of the different things that can go into an optimization study. So what are we even optimizing for? It's kind of one layer of this onion. You know, shareholder value. What does that even really mean? Is that NPV? What discount rate? Is that WACC? Are we optimizing at a well level, portfolio level, project level? Who knows? Enumerating all the different decisions that you want to take a look at when you're doing an optimization study. So the most fundamental is, do you drill or do you not drill? What spacing, what lateral length, what completion design? So these are a lot of the questions that we're trying to answer with the Whitson X product, and that's why, super excited to join the team and work on that. And then you also start getting into some of these like meta layers of the onion, like how effective are we at actually evaluating some of these options in the first place? One of the big things to keep in mind in any of these studies is that you're not actually directly optimizing the physical wells or the field, you're optimizing a model. So how good is that model as a representation for reality? So how accurate are our predictions? It certainly helps, Plug to Braden and team to have a well-calibrated neural network to back some of these performance predictions. And then kind of the final middle layer that I want to talk about is, how effective are you at actually capturing some of the value once you make some of these optimization decisions? So, you might go, throw in the kitchen sink into some algorithm, into some piece of software, might say, the best strategy is to bring on your wells when oil peaks at $125 a barrel. Thank you, Mr. Trump. Is that realistic? I'm not sure. So it's important to think about all of these things. Remember that, it's an onion, got a bunch of layers. And for today's talk, I'll just kind of work through kind of a simple example simple question, complex solution that most of the folks in this room are probably fairly familiar with, which is, suppose you're given a undeveloped or a partially undeveloped land base. So, for example, this might look slightly Montagnesque to somebody, data synthetic, but kind of follows the same kind of trends. So your company's got 38,000 acres in an unconventional play that's partially undeveloped. You've got multiple fluid windows spanning from dry gas to volatile oil. And then, thanks to your well-calibrated neural network, wink, wink, you have robust predictions of how well performance is going to degrade as a function of well spacing, as well as other factors. Corporate's going to release funding for you for a development program of up to 24 wells per section. You don't have to spend it all if you don't think you want to. And then the question is, what is the value of this land position? So you might start off deterministically, as one typically does. You might come up with some sort of economic tiering map where we're finding, in this case, just running it flat at 75 CAD oil and $3 DJ ACO. You might find that this volatile oil window is looking fairly economic, but dry gas not so much, liquids rich gas, and then up dip on some of the kind of more normally pressured higher water cut stuff, again not looking so great. So you might take a look at this, and we look at it and we found at the base pricing only 31 of our 60 DSUs are even economic. And here just quick side note, using PI ratio, if you're not on board, it's kind of nice, less squirrely, there's no multiple PIs, but there are multiple IRRs. So it's a kind of nice way of looking at things at a first pass. But I'll ask the question, is this kind of a deterministic nav really representative of the value of our land position? So based on how I phrase that question, you can probably guess that I'm going to argue that it's not. And one of the key reasons is, it undersells the number of options that you have, and it undersells the amount of value that you can extract from that land by flexing some of these important decision variables. So using Whitson X, for example, to rapidly generate performance predictions between 4 and 12 wells per section for each of these DSUs, we find that of those 60 DSUs, we found 10 of them had an economic optimum at 12 wells per section. Then you had 6 going down that list at 8 wells per section, a few more at 6 wells per section. Then we didn't show the entire table here just for legibility. A bunch of them kind of more marginal acreage. We were finding the economic optimum at kind of a super wide 4 well per section spacing. So, like I say, with optimization, anytime you think you know something, let's unpeel a layer of the onion. So should we drill all 10 of those DSUs at our kind of highest 12 wells per section? Maybe, it depends. Are you optimizing your DSU level economics, or are you trying to optimize your project level economics? And if you want to, again, go one layer deeper, are you actually optimizing a corporate portfolio economics? So as spacing gets tighter, as everybody knows, marginal incremental returns are going to go lower and lower. It's going to be a diminishing returns thing, because at best, your next well that you squeeze in is going to produce the same amount of oil or gas that the previous well did. At worst, might be a little bit less, could be substantially less. And since we're capital constrained, as we often are in life, is it better off to drill your best DSU at 12 wells per section, or do you want to drill your top 2 at 6 wells per section each? So you can play around with some of those permutations, because every time you decide to add incremental wells to your top DSU, you're pushing out inventory in time, and that's got a time value of money impact. So to do this, quick simulation algorithm. I'm not saying this is optimum. It's just one of the cool things that you can do when you plug yourself into the Whitson X matrix and have access to that kind of full, prediction all the way through economics workflow in one place. So if we calculate DSU economics for all the spacing and timing options, then kind of rank them based on, for your year one, essentially, what are your top DSUs based on PI ratio? Create budget year spacing options subject to that 24 well constraint. So do you want to drill 2 12 buys, or do you want to drill 4 6 buys, or 6 4 buys? Calculate the economics for that, but then also recompute what your drilling schedule is going to look like for the rest of the development program. Compare full project NPVs, not year one, not DSU one, but full project NPVs across all of those. lock yourself down, drill some wells, and step forward to the next time step in the simulation. So a number of different ways that you can take a look at this. One way that I wanted to showcase was kind of a cumulative NPV versus time chart. So you can take a look, the various gray series here are at 4x, 6x, 8x, and 12x fixed spacing. So assuming you drill everything that's economic at those kind of fixed spacing methods, versus if you let the algorithm kind of decide, what generates the most project level NPV, going back and forth depending on the quality of that acreage. So you can see, you're off to a little bit of a slower start with this kind of blue optimized case, but you quickly eclipse the overall NPV generation of just logging yourself in. So just trying to show you that the ability to look at some of these different field development options and then take those all the way to project NPV is super valuable. This was, quite simple to do, but again, there's another layer to the onion. Obviously, this is also a function of pricing, which most people know. This is again primarily because you are investing incremental dollars at diminishing returns. So when to stop investing, kind of where you stop making money, is going to depend on overall commodity prices. So if you take a look at this chart, using this case study, we found that 4 wells per section for DSU number 3, and again, this changes totally depending on where you are in the fluid windows, varies totally depending on overall reservoir quality, looks different, right? So up to $69 a barrel, we found 4 wells per section was optimum for this DSU. Between $69 and $74 a barrel, 6 wells. Between 74 and 87, 8 wells, and north of $87 a barrel, 12 wells per section was what we wanted to go with. And to make matters more complicated, as Mr. Trump and everybody have shown us, pricing is super volatile, even more so than we sometimes remember. So let's take this original simulation algorithm and let's Monte Carlo pricing. So instead of just going straight through to your budget year economics and setting your synthetic budget, let's try to simulate what pricing is going to look like at each step of the Monte Carlo, and then lock in hedges, make your decision, and drill some wells, hopefully profit. So I'll say that to do this properly is very complicated. That's why I call this stochastic-ish pricing. One of the nice things about forward curves in kind of the shale era is if you take a look at charts like you see the animation on the right-hand side, which, as a quick aside, if you guys don't follow Jeremy McRae on LinkedIn, he's got awesome infographics, awesome animations like this. So you can see that oftentimes the back end of the forward curve tends to kind of converge on kind of long-term pricing. And although pricing, in any given day, in any given month, in any given budget year is fluctuating quite a bit, it tends to have this behavior of kind of like converging on kind of a long-term equilibrium, kind of supply, long-term supply-demand based price. So what that means for us is if I just want to simplify this problem a little bit to the point where I can actually simulate this, let's roll the dice on AECO and let's roll the dice on crude oil and condensate pricing in Canada every year for budget. And then let's basically impute like a synthetic forward curve to say that, long term, we're expecting that 75 and $3, but in any given year might be $1.50, might be $4.50 GJ, might be 55, might be $95 a barrel. So you do that, you plug that into the algorithm, and you can do kind of interesting things like, I've got some heat maps for spacing, for drill schedule, and you can see that if you actually let the algorithm decide year by year what it wants to drill and what spacing it wants to drill at, sometimes it's, fairly similar to the deterministic answer. Like DSU 16 and DSU 23 rise to the top in all of our iterations in this particular case study, and they're still kind of locked into that 12 by spacing. But as you go further and further down, timing becomes more of an unknown. The optimum, the optimum well spacing that gets selected becomes more of an unknown as well. So kind of interesting. And really, what we're trying to drive to with this is, put it all together, come up with kind of a probabilistic heat map essentially of what expected value or NPV per section or per DSU is going to look like. So you can kind of see on the left-hand side here, we found that the Monte Carlo simulation picked to drill most of the DSUs 100% of the time. Some of the fringier stuff, especially on kind of some of the higher water cut and liquids-rich gas, came in at 2%, 16%, 4% of the time. And then you can kind of multiply that with the middle chart, or the middle map rather, which is the expected value, so kind of average NPV across all of the iterations where it was drilled, to generate kind of a risked NPV per section map. Another way to look at it is also doing this kind of similar stochastic version of this cum NPV versus time chart. And you can see that in our Monte Carlo simulation, we found expected NPV was $488 million with a P90 of 368, P10 of 609. What was kind of interesting was, how does that compare to our deterministic case? And it's actually lower. So some of you who kind of get nerdy about option theory, stuff like that, aren't options supposed to have value? Like, why isn't this higher than the deterministic case? And where I think I landed on this one was, although the option has value, volatility also has a cost because you're starting with finite, like fixed inventory. And it's really like fundamentally the same reason that our parents or grandparents and retirees don't just YOLO it on stocks, like they have bonds in their portfolio as well. Because when you're burning through inventory at the low pricing, it really costs you a ton. So you shouldn't be comparing the blue line to that gray line. You should be comparing it to this dotted gray line, which is if you take the schedule that you determined deterministically, but still Monte Carlo the pricing, what is the expected value from that? So in that case, we do kind of see the anticipated behavior. So I went through that fast to try to get people out to happy hour. But point I wanted to make was there's a lot of onions here and there's a lot of layers. With apologies to Mathias and Braden, I think Whitson has previously been compared to a Formula One state-of-the-art race car. I'm going to compare it to the infamous slap chop. At this point, I'm fairly convinced that I've lost all of the interns and EITs in the room. For those who haven't seen this infomercial, I highly recommend going to YouTube and trying to rewatch it. As a further aside, this guy's a little bit nuts. He ended up in jail. I think he ran for the Republican primaries in Texas. But anyway, I digress. So there's a bunch of onions out there. There's a bunch of layers to all of those onions. And with tools that start capturing more and more of that integrated workflow, this becomes something that you can actually use to dynamically optimize all these things, test different development strategies, test different business strategies, and start looking at things like the effects of depletion, the effects of 3D spacing and interference. If you really want to make your head hurt, start looking at the global portfolio like my previous job. So anyway, we hope we are building kind of a more useful tool to chop through some onions. And with that, I'll hand it over to quick questions. Thanks very much.
And with onions, you'll always use glasses, else you start to cry. Question?
In order to do economics, some companies and individuals make careers out of them, so they're a little complicated sometimes. Can you discuss your economic engine and your assumptions? Yep. For instance, royalties are rate dependent. Higher rate wells will have different royalties.
Yeah, 100%. So I started off as a reservoir engineer, worked with Braden and Daniel actually here at Apache Canada, but then I moved into the corporate planning side at Apache down in Houston, and then most recently at AltaGas. Canadian economics are quite challenging. I've heard from somebody in the room here that when they were working on Canadian economics, the Canadian royalties had more lines of code than the entire U.S. economic calculation chain combined. So I think that has been my experience coding it as well. It's super complicated. It's computationally very expensive. This uses an American economic engine, but we are building the Canadian as well.
I think it's happy hour time. Okay, I think with that, we're going to thank Ryan. Big applause. And for those of you who thought we were all going to go on a jet and go to Barcelona, I have to disappoint you. But apparently it's a really good place, right? Jess is over there already. I hope everybody can join us. And thank you again for joining us here today. We really appreciate the community here in Calgary and in Canada. And it's just getting bigger and bigger. So thank you again for joining us, and hope to see you again next year.
And if anyone didn't get the RTA and decline posters, there's some on the table to take.